The Amazing Digital Circus is almost at an end, so here's everything you'll need to know before you head to that theater or click on that finale. Hello internets, welcome to Film Theory, the show that's running around with a bucket on its head. Hope I don't run headlong into the ow! Jeez! So friends, the day is almost here. The curtain has almost been called on the Amazing Digital Circus. In fact, by the time you're watching this, some people may have already seen the finale in theaters. I know I did, and I vigorously took notes. We'll have a full-blown theory ready the weekend the episode is available for everyone. But in the meantime, I wanted to take this chance to catch up on the journey we've had with this series. All of the analysis and predictions and dumb thoughts that we've had along the way. Why? Well, while a lot of our older predictions may not have panned out, many of them were surprisingly on point, even if the actual context of those things wasn't exactly what we predicted. Looking at you, the Pomni is Jesus metaphor from the famous Matt Pat out of context compilations. So sit back, relax, and conjure some candy to eat, loyal theorists. Here's everything you could possibly need to know before the end of the Amazing Digital Circus.
The pilot follows a woman named Pomni, who's thrust into a strange digital world styled after a circus, alongside 5 other humans. Jax, the lovable jerk, Ragatha, the sweet optimist, Gangle, who can't hide her emotions, Zubul, who's made out of a bunch of random objects, and Kinger, who's been trapped there the longest and has gone kinda crazy as a result. The whole circus is run by a ringleader named Koen, who according to the show's website is a quote, wacky AI, and all of the humans are just subject to his every whim and desire.
Gadzooks, you're right, Jax! We should have a brand new adventure for our new member, Pomni!
I said that like 5 minutes ago.
However, the humans don't necessarily want to go on these adventures, and they're constantly trying to find ways of getting out. This has even driven some of them insane, leaving them abstracted, where they devolve into monsters. Case in point, the clown Kaufmo was obsessed with finding the exit, and abstracts just before Pomni shows up.
Oh, Kaufmo's been abstracted. It's okay.
What is that?
And yet, even when Pomni does get herself to the exit in this pilot episode, it doesn't go anywhere. It's just endless hallways and office spaces repeating. It is basically the back rooms. As it turns out, Koen made this fake exit, hoping to give the humans what they wanted. He just didn't know what to put on the other side.
I do have to apologize for lying about the exit. I was having so much trouble figuring out what to put on the other side and ended up never quite finishing it.
And more or less, that's where we leave the colorful cast of the Amazing Digital Circus after this first episode. Now, already there's just so much world building here for us to dig into. So many questions posed that we want the answers to. Like, who's behind the Amazing Digital Circus? Is there an actual way out, or are they just trapped forever? Are characters like Kaufmo really gone, or can they be brought back in some way? And sorry to say, I don't have a whole lot of answers for those things. Not yet. For as much as Glitch and Gooseworks packed into the first episode, they've done the wise thing and not given us a whole lot of answers. But I do think they've given us plenty here to theorize about. So here are 3 Amazing Digital Circus theories. Don't run for the exit doors yet, my friends. We're going in. Let's start things off a bit small scale here. Theory number 1, everything in the show is literally a video game set in the late 1990s. Now, there's a lot in just this one episode that paints this as a video game world. For example, right at the beginning, we see a pixelated title card for the show that's obviously in the style of old school PC, PlayStation, and N64 games. This is further driven home in a secret video that you can find if you go to wackywatch.com, a URL shown on screen during the episode, which shows us the main menu for this game. We also see a flower pot fall to the ground and clip into it, kind of like an old school source engine glitch. Koen mentions that he created the digital world in the weird backrooms office area in a way that's very similar to how a game developer would create world spaces. Plus, when Pomni first enters the world, she says this:
I put on some weird headset and now I'm here.
Again, directly implying that the whole thing is a game. She put on a VR headset and was transported into the world of the digital circus. All of that checks out and should be pretty darn obvious to the casual viewer. But what you might have missed is the fact that this is set in the late 1990s and not the present day, like you might expect from something talking about using VR headsets. And there is a lot of circumstantial evidence that points us to this conclusion. First of all, basically all the tech that we see throughout the series seems to be pulling straight from the 90s. Anytime we see a computer in the show, it's always the white boxy styled CRT monitors and large white computer towers reminiscent of models made by companies like Dell and Gateway back in the 90s and early 2000s. And this is both in the actual episode and in the off-site material as well. In that same Wacky Watch commercial, we see a real-life computer with the same old-school design. What's more, the beginning of this Wacky Watch video says that this was an old tape recovered on a date that's censored, and given the degradation on that tape, it implies that not only is this video old, but it was also recovered in the past as well. But this goes beyond just the tech that's used in the series. series. Many of the characters and iconography from the show are very reminiscent of popular characters and ideas from the late 90s and early 2000s. Pomni's gesture design takes a lot of cues from Sega's old Nights into Dream series. Jax shares design inspiration and a similar name with Max, the rabbit, from the Sam & Max games. Bubble clearly takes cues from Super Mario's Chain Chomps. Jax and Gangle were both inspired by characters like Poppy the Performer, an old Japanese 3D animated series, while Kane and the Digital Circus setup's very reminiscent of the villain and plot of I Have No Mouth and I Must Scream, a short story by Harlan Ellison adapted into a point-and-click adventure game in 1995. Any way you slice it, it's very clear that the creators want the show to have the same 90s vibe that we're all so nostalgic for right now. But you might be thinking, hold on, they're talking about VR headsets here. That's a modern thing, right? Wouldn't this thing just be inspired by the 1990s rather than set in the 1990s? That's a pretty good call out. A lot of advances in virtual reality technology have only been made across the last decade, especially when you're talking about gaming. But that doesn't mean that VR technology didn't exist back in the 1990s. And I'm not just talking about the rudimentary black and red wireframes of the Virtual Boy either. Back in 1991, Sega announced the Sega VR. In 1993, Virtuality created the Mega Visor display. And in 1995, Fort Technology hit us with the VFX-1 headset, just to name a few. And looking into old footage of all these things, it doesn't look too dissimilar to the sort of world that we see in the Amazing Digital Circus. Simple, flat textures, rudimentary shapes and polygons. There's not a lot of detail here, but that's for good reason. These headsets, they couldn't handle a lot of detail. True story, I actually have some first-hand experience with these rudimentary headsets. The Great Lakes Science Center in Cleveland, Ohio actually had a special exhibit on VR technology in its basement when I was a kid, and it blew my mind. With the amount of wires and cables these things took to run, it felt like you were jacking into the Matrix, and you had to wait 45 minutes to put on one of these headsets, but all of a sudden you were dropped into a video game. It was simple. I was walking through a purple field with a bunch of green triangular mountains in the background, but it was effective, and it captured my imagination for decades since. So much so that even though it was a 5-minute experience that happened in my life like 2 decades ago, I still remember it vividly to this very day. Anyway, MatPat childhood stories aside, the long and short of all of this, everything that we see in the series is pointing to this taking place in the past and not in the present. All of this has already happened from our perspective. We're just watching the events of the game unfold. So now that we know that we're in a 1990s video game here, let's dig a bit deeper, shall we? Theory number 2, Pomni helped create this hell simulation that they're currently stuck in. It's a pretty bold claim, so what would make me say that? Well, a couple of things. Firstly, one of the scenes that really jumped out to me while I was watching and rewatching the pilot was the sequence where Pomni's running through the back rooms on the other side of the exit door. At one point, she enters a more traditional looking office space with computers and cubicles before stopping and staring at one desk in particular. This is played as a big moment. We linger on this shot for a long time as a classic horror-esque dolly zoom hits both the desk and Pomni before she has herself a psychological break. The lights start to flicker and she cackles uncomfortably before running on. The whole thing is really menacing and off-putting and clearly meant to leave us with a big impression. Why? Well, because this desk isn't just some simulation that Kane cooked up in the back rooms. It's based on a real place in the real world of this universe outside of the simulation. A place that we actually see in the episode. At the very end, right before the credits roll, we zoom out of the circus and through the void, revealing that all of this has been taking place inside of a computer. That makes sense. We've already established that this right here is a big old simulation. But take a look at the computer and the desk. It's the exact same setup that we saw earlier in the episode in the backroom section. The same old equipment on the left, the same file cabinets on the right, the same retro monitor and keyboard and computer tower and speakers, the same VR headset and headphones. This is exactly the same, but clearly this one's in the real world. Not only have we literally zoomed out of the computer, implying that we're no longer in said simulation, but the lighting in the scene is much more natural. It's warmer. Sunlight is streaming through the nearby window, all at an angle because the sun's lower in the sky. This is not the flat computer simulation lighting that we've been seeing throughout the rest of the episode. That right there, the desk and computer setup existing both in the simulation and in the real world, is already a pretty interesting point, but why then would it break Pomni? What causes her to go off the deep end and start laughing? Well, I think that subconsciously, Pomni recognizes that this is her desk. At the beginning of the episode, they make it clear that Pomni has lost her human memories, but this, I believe, is triggering a deep realization inside of her. Based on what we're given here, I believe that Pomni's human persona is an employee at CNA, the company developing the Digital Circus game and VR headset, and seeing it here inside the game unlocks some weird flash of her memory as to what's happening to get her into this situation. She's trapped in the very game that she helped to create. It's ironic, hence why she laughs. It's funny. It's darkly funny. I can see this being a huge reveal down the line, and one that could be potentially devastating for all the rest of our characters. For Pomni, obviously, but also for all the other characters who are trapped in here who would be seeing her as the one to blame for their current imprisonment. Also, real quick super short micro theory. I don't think we have enough enough information to figure out what the initials in the company name C and A stand for, but one possibility that did jump out to me, it could potentially stand for Cain and Abel, partially named after the AI ringleader of the simulation Cain, which could then lead itself to a lot of interesting story possibilities. You see, Cain and Abel are a pair of brothers who are the sons of Adam and Eve, with Cain ultimately killing his brother and creating the first ever murder in the world. Anyway, you know how we love ourselves a good biblical reference here, and I just wanted to mention it in case we get more clues in future episodes. But something we do have more than enough to say about, theory number 3, all the characters aren't actually humans trapped inside the digital circus. Instead, they're all digital copies of the brains of humans who've put on these headsets, cloned and then forced into the simulation. Now this is a pretty big swing. I mean, Pomni's first line of the series is practically, "Oh no, I'm a human who put on a headset and now I'm trapped here." And then Cain follows it up with this.
My, it appears a new human has entered this realm!
Human. He calls her a human. And that actually lines up with what we've seen with the official synopsis, explicitly calling Pomni and the others humans, in contrast to Cain being an AI. Quote from that synopsis: "A woman gets trapped in a crazy virtual world along with 5 other humans and are now subject to the whims of wacky AI and their own personal traumas." Plus, I just personally like the image of a bunch of people strapped into these VR headsets a la Sword Art Online. But all of that being said, I believe that there's a lot of evidence pointing towards these characters being computerized clones rather than actual humans. For instance, as I mentioned above, Pomni starts going a bit crazy when she sees her desk from the real world in the circus's back rooms. But think, what was actually on that desk? A headset. Pretty clearly a headset that is not on any human's head. And that's not just a thing in the simulation, it's also on the desk in the real world too that we see in the final shot of the pilot. If there's a human trapped in the digital circus here with a headset firmly planted on their head that they can't get off, shouldn't they, be stuck there with the headset on their head? Given the little that we have to go off of right now, it makes more sense that Pomni put on the headset, had her consciousness copied into the game, and then she just took off the headset to go home. Meanwhile, Pomni in the game can't take it off because she's not a flesh and blood human anymore. She's a digital copy whose memories begin the moment the headset was put on. And even if we're wrong and this desk isn't Pomni's, all the other characters went through this exact same process when they first joined, as Jax hinted at when he sarcastically said,
How do I take this headset off?
Just keep grabbing at it. That worked for all of us.
They all tried the exact same thing, and it didn't work for any of them. They're all digital copies grasping at a VR headset that isn't there anymore. But you know the thing that really convinced me of this theory? The mannequins. Yeah, did you notice these guys? All throughout the episode, we see several artist mannequins populating the circus. These are the things that artists will sometimes buy to help them get references for poses. Most prominently, we see them in the restaurant with Cain and Bubble acting as background characters. But why would they matter? Well, we know that Cain can create NPCs.
Cain, is this one of your NPCs or is this a new sucker?
So maybe these mannequins are just random nameless characters that Cain made up to fill in the circus. Maybe, but that just doesn't sit right with me. First off, the dolls are clearly capable of emotions. We see one get upset when Pomni interrupts it taking a bath, silently screaming at Pomni until she slams the door. There's something more going on here than just these things being background extras. Take a look at this. When Ragatha is showing Pomni to her room, there are several other doors for other characters in the background. This is actually a great piece of world building. We see that each of the current characters have themselves their own rooms, as well as several other characters that we haven't met yet. There's this colorful one that I can't quite make out, what looks to be a pinkish purple goo monster, some sort of cute doggo, green and orange anteater looking guy, a black queen chess piece that I'm gonna guess is named Queenie, seems to be Kinger's counterpart, implying that he didn't come into the simulation alone. Regardless, all of these portraits have giant red X's over them, and that checks out. These are likely characters that have abstracted in the past, just like Kaufmo did. We even see other abstracted creatures in the cellar when Cain banishes Kaufmo. Anyway, along with these past and current characters, we also see several doors with blank mannequins on them. Not just one, but multiple doors. If I had to guess what's going on here, when a new human enters the game, these rooms transform into one that's appropriate for them, and the mannequin on the door transforms into their character. And what's more, I believe that there's a mannequin in the game that also transforms into that character. Right now, they're placeholders, but they get molded into these human copies whenever someone new puts on the headset, and their brain gets scanned into the system. That would fit thematically with the idea of the mannequins to begin with. They're supposed to be used as references and then turned into something real when you're using them for your artwork. That would also fit with the fact that they're on the doors of all these empty rooms, and the characters being scanned clones of human brains would fit the fact that they can't take off their headsets, despite us seeing a headset not being worn at a desk that is clearly meant to be Pomni's. It just all fits with what we've seen from the series so far. In short, the series is gaslighting us. It isn't about a bunch of humans trapped in a simulation, it's about a bunch of human consciousnesses that have been scanned into an AI system and then mapped onto blank mannequin bodies, where the computer can then simulate their human behavior and push their buttons to the breaking point, learning the weaknesses of the human psyche. And then, when they've had too much and abstract out of the system, well, then you just boot up another new simulation and try again. There is no exit door, just an endless loop of torturous tests run by Kane as he tries to understand the human experience. Just like a real circus, all of it is just a big performance.
Jack Black is gonna play Kaufmo the Clown in the Amazing Digital Circus. Is that a stupid swing for the fences theory with very little evidence to support it? You bet it is, but there's some evidence for it, which is why it's a short. In the pilot, we're told that Kaufmo the Clown is obsessed with finding the exit from the circus. This eventually drives him mad, causing him to abstract into a giant glitching eyeball monster. At some point, though, you know, there's gonna be a flashback about this guy. And when there is, it's gonna be none other than world-famous YouTuber Jablinski Games.
Five Nights at Freddy's, that's where I wanna be.
Why would I say that? Well, if you go to a URL seen briefly in the pilot episode, you'll find an in-universe ad for the Amazing Digital Circus. And as they show off the names of the show's characters, when they get to Kaufmo, it glitches out and shows an old picture of Jack Black instead. That would also fit with Black's voiceover work in things like the Mario movie and Kung Fu Panda. Plus, he's done all sorts of YouTube collabs, like his song Video Games where he worked with Oni Plays. It just makes sense that he'd say yes to something like this.
In case you missed our last theory on the Amazing Digital Circus, the long and short of it is that we believe that the circus here isn't exactly what it appears to be. Instead of some futuristic, fully immersive experience, we believe that it's actually a VR video game from the 1990s, one that copies the brains of anyone who puts on the headset. It then turns that copy into a digital character to go on adventures throughout the circus. So the people trapped in this world looking for an exit, they're not actually people, just digital copies of their consciousnesses, their personalities. That's why we repeatedly see workstations of VR headsets in the first episode, but with no one actually wearing the headsets. And our theories didn't stop there. We continued by saying that Pomni is either the creator of the game or an employee at the development studio making the game, as evidenced by our mental breakdown when seeing those work desks. And while this is the direction that I still believe the series is headed for,
how about we talk about something else?
You see, there's still a ton to dig into here with the Digital Circus. Well, sure, those initial theories are the ones that I think are the most likely and the most intentional. It's once to stretch a bit further out that some of the truly fun, wacky ideas really start to develop. Are they right? Yeah, probably not. Are they interesting and fun? Absolutely. And therein lies the beauty of theory crafting. For example, last time I briefly tossed out a bit of wild speculation that the Digital Circus may have itself some biblical connections. In this brief scene exploring the backrooms of the company who seemingly created the circus, we see the initials C and A painted onto the wall. C made me immediately connect things back to our lovable AI ringleader Kane, a guy who's probably the most in control of this entire situation. And if you tend to see the name Kane partnered with the initial A in any sort of pop cultural reference, the first immediate jump is gonna be to the biblical story of Cain and Abel. See, Cain and Abel were the children of Adam and Eve, the first humans to ever exist in the Abrahamic religions. At the time, I wasn't really sure if this was meant to be anything or if it was gonna lead anywhere, but the more I sat and thought about it, the more connections that I started to make. Some of those connections were admittedly very dumb. For example, in biblical canon, Cain kills Abel and becomes the first murderer. And what does Cain do multiple times throughout the pilot? He pops bubble for comedic effect. Ow!
You parasite!
Cain kills a bubble, a bull. Coincidence? Absolutely yes. It is single-handedly one of the dumbest things I've ever said in a theory, and I have said a lot of dumb things in theories. But other parallels that I found as I was doing this little brain search through the episode again were a lot more compelling. In fact, some connections were so large that I believe I may have just cracked the question of what the Digital Circus is wide open. You see, loyal theorists, the Amazing Digital Circus isn't just some mere video game that's trapped these consciousnesses. No. It's something much darker. It's an eternity of torment and torture. The Amazing Digital Circus is, quite literally, hell. Put on your headsets and get your randomly generated names, my friends. We're going in. So the claim that the Digital Circus is literally hell is a pretty bold one, so why would I possibly make it? Well, look at this. At the very end of the pilot, here we're shown all the human characters sitting at a table while eating food. But you notice anything weird about their dining arrangement? Of all the ways they could have set up this table, they decided to have every character on on just one side, all of them facing the same direction, out at us, the audience. When this is done in fiction, it's rarely by mistake, because this right here, this is a very iconic framing device from one of the most famous paintings ever made, The Last Supper by Leonardo da Vinci. This depicts the final meal of Jesus and his followers shared before his crucifixion. It's been the backbone of conspiracy theories and Dan Brown novels for centuries. Gooseworks, creator of the series, and all the other creatives over at Glitch, they're smart people. They wouldn't be using this imagery without understanding the historical baggage that comes along with it. And it's not just the table layout that's worth calling out here. Look at Pomni in the center, the exact position that Jesus is in for the painting. And notice the colors of Pomni, red and blue. Wouldn't it be weird if, oh wait, never mind, Jesus is also dressed in red and blue. The interpretation of his colors is that the blue represents the divine half of God, heaven, and his red represents the blood, mankind. So in Jesus, you have the mixing of these two elements, a God born amongst men and set to live as a human, red plus blue. And in Pomni, we actually have something similar, at least if our earlier theories were correct. A creator of this game, a god of this world, if you will, now set to live as a part of their own creation. And it's not like religion is completely absent from this world either, quite the contrary. We know for a fact that God exists in the circus in some form or another. During the first adventure that Keen sets up for Pomni, the Gloink Queen says this:
I am Gloinks. You will be Gloinks. God will be Gloinks.
What an oddly specific thing to say. Speaking of making oddly specific references that we can build off of, let's talk about abstraction. According to the show, when you obsess over being trapped in the circus and drive yourself crazy looking for a way out,
Eventually you get to asking what the point of anything is, and you completely lose sight of who you are and why you're even alive, and when you reach your breaking point, something really terrible can happen.
this is known as abstraction. And we see the results of it when we meet Kaufmo the Clown, or at least what's left of him.
Oh! Kaufmo's been abstracted!
Last time, I wasn't really sure if we had enough to really make a judgment over what was happening here, but I did find some more information when digging through the creator Gooseworks' Tumblr. According to her, abstracting isn't just going crazy and becoming a big scary monster. It's definitely part of it for sure, but there is a deeper meaning. According to Gooseworks, when you abstract, you lose everything about yourself. You're stripped of every single scrap of individuality that you become something unrecognizable. All abstracted people look the same, this glitchy four-legged monster covered in eyeballs. And perhaps most importantly, abstraction cannot be undone. Now, looking back over the series with this new lens of religious imagery, the abstracted start resembling something else, something beyond just monsters. They almost look like angels. Well, not really angels, more biblically accurate angels, which, ironically enough, doesn't really come from the Bible. Let me explain, it's kind of confusing. 3 years ago, a meme started spreading across the internet featuring these monstrous multi-eyed creations. They were called biblically accurate angels. Now, you might look at these things and go, really? They don't exactly look like the traditional image of an angel with robes and wings and halos and all that. But what they're riffing on here is a very specific part of the Bible. A few chapters in the book of Ezekiel where he describes having visions of winged creatures with 4 faces, some human, some animal, and these creatures were joined by wheels within wheels with eyes. Here's a version of the quote. I looked, and I saw beside the cherubim 4 wheels, one beside each of the cherubim. Their entire bodies, including their backs, their hands, and their wings, were completely full of eyes, as were their 4 wheels. Now, for the sake of clarity, the wheels with eyes, or ophonym, both are and aren't considered angels depending on what documents you're using and how you're classifying things. And again, all of this is based on a few very short lines in a very long, very ancient religious tradition, but that's neither here nor there. The point is that these religious entities are always described as having an abnormal number of eyes all over their bodies, just like the abstracted that we're seeing in Digital Circus. The weird descriptions even fit with the name abstraction. These so-called biblically accurate angels are weird, almost completely unrecognizable to humans because we can't comprehend what we're witnessing. They're unknowable. In other words, they're abstract. Now, while it's never made clear why these biblical creatures would have so many eyes, one persistent idea is that the design represents God's watchful eye over us. They're always watching us because God knows all. He sees all. Look again at the Digital Circus. There's a ton of eyeball imagery here, all throughout this first episode. Eyes are hidden in the intro, they're hidden in paintings, they're hidden in the background. Kane even admits that he wants all the cast to stay in the circus,
Where I can keep my hundreds of all-seeing eyes on you.
Kane, an omniscient character who knows everything, a god of sorts. And what's he made of? Basically a mouth and 2 big ol' eyes. Oh, and looking at Kane's dialogue through this more religious lens makes this line hit a whole lot different.
Do you like adventure, activity, wonder, danger, horror, pain, suffering, agony, death, disease, death, angel food cake?
Ow! Not only does suffering, agony, and death all sound very hellish, but why angel food cake? Like, why call out that specific type of cake here? Again, we have ourselves a weird connection to angels and religion that comes seemingly out of nowhere. But the most compelling reason for why we can draw parallels between this series and all these religious ideas has to be the way that the creator Gooseworks talks about the digital circus. When asked if anyone in the series would be killed, Gooseworks answered that it depends on your definition of kill, which is likely pointing to the idea of abstraction. But it's interesting that she makes this distinction. It means that none of these characters can die, so to speak. They're trapped in here forever in eternal torment, just like hell. Gooseworks also talks about how characters deserve to be there, specifically calling out Jax as the one who deserves to be there the most. Using the phrase deserves to be there, it shows that the circus is some place of judgment. It's either a reward for those who are good or a punishment for those who are evil. And considering Gooseworks has a lot of negative things to say about Jax, this ain't your reward day at the spa. Time and time again, Gooseworks has gone on the record to say how awful Jax is. According to Gooseworks, Jax is morally the worst character in the show, so much so that when asked if he was more of a jerk or an anti-hero, she explained that, quote, there's absolutely nothing heroic about Jax. Those are some pretty strong words for a character that you yourself created. When another fan commented that they hoped Jax was gonna get worse, Gooseworks said, you're probably gonna enjoy some of the things we have planned. And already the behavior that we've seen from him throughout the series is pretty awful. He's mean, he trips people, he knocks them over, he steps on one of Gangle's masks without Karen. He knows that Ragatha's deepest fear is centipedes, and he uses that information to torture her.
By the way, I may have left something in your room today, so let me know if you find it. You're not afraid of centipedes, are you?
Jax! That's literally my only fear. Why would you do this?
Jax is clearly not a good person. So if Gooseworks is saying that he deserves to be in the circus more than most, then it clearly implies that we're trapped in hell. But just because they're in hell doesn't necessarily mean it has to be your typical fire and brimstone hell. Case in point, one of the most influential depictions of hell comes from a play by French philosopher Jean-Paul Sartre, known as Huis Clos, or translated into English, No Exit. In it, 3 people condemned to hell are brought into the same room and locked inside, but instead of a torture chamber, they just find a comfortably furnished room. Not exactly what you'd expect, right? But as these 3 start talking and getting to know each other, they realize they don't click. They annoy each other, they push each other's buttons, and they twist the knife until one of them realizes this is the torture. A famous line from the play reads, hell is other people. That sounds exactly like what we see here in the digital circus. It's 6 people who don't necessarily click with one another, and no matter how polite they are, they all still push each other's buttons. They exploit each other's fears and fake laugh at each other's jokes. But the worst part of all, there's no exit. Trapped in a digital room with no escape. But now to the big question. What's the point? It's all interesting for sure, but why bring up all these parallels? Well, if we can point to all these religious ideas to show what the digital circus is and how they're going to be using it in the story, we can also use them to point to where the story is headed. Specifically, I believe that we can use the religious imagery to get a pretty good idea of what Pomni's story arc is going to be. You see, Pomni is digital circus's parallel to Jesus Christ. I know that sounds insane. Sounds crazy enough for one of those Matt Pat out of context compilations that I see floating around. But the connections are there when you actually stop and look at them. I mean, think back to what I pointed out earlier about the Last Supper scene. Pomni is framed as the one in the center, exactly where Jesus is sitting in the painting. Her color scheme matches Jesus's. His robes are split between 2 colors, red and blue, just like Pomni's jester outfit. Additionally, we have to consider Pomni's hand. About halfway through the episode, when the abstracted Kaufmo attacks Ragatha and makes her glitch, Pomni tries to help her and gets her hand glitched in the process. This plot line is actually left unresolved at the end of the episode, with Cain fixing Ragatha, but not Pomni, who keeps the glitching hand a secret. In Christianity, wounds or scars on your hand like this usually reference a very specific thing, stigmata. These are representative of the wounds that Jesus got when he was being hammered onto the cross, usually depicted as scars on your hands. Another connection to Pomni. And if our previous theory is correct and Pomni's human persona is an employee of the company behind the digital circus, well, she's the developer of this game. That would make her the creator. And just like Jesus is an aspect of God in many sects of Christianity, that would make Pomni an aspect of a god or creator of this world. Heck, her arc in the very first episode, forgetting who she is so that the information can be dramatically revealed to her later on, it even follows what Jesus went through in biblical texts, beginning life as a human before having to discover for himself that he is in fact the Son of God, discovering his purpose to save humanity from themselves. And this is why I think we have to care about all this. this, why we started looking at all these religious parallels in the first place. If the digital circus is indeed designed to be hell, and everyone here is condemned to be there in some way, and Pomni suddenly comes in as a representative of Jesus, well, she's there to save them, to help the other cast members escape from this torment that they found themselves in Pomni's creation. But in the cruelest twist of fate, saving them is gonna doom Pomni. If I was a betting man, I'd say that Pomni will be the only one left in the digital circus after she's helped all the others to escape. Just like Jesus sacrificed himself for humanity, Pomni is gonna do the same thing here. She's gonna get left behind, forever tortured by this wacky AI going on his silly adventures. But it'll have been worth it because she'll manage to save everyone else.
Finally, after 6 months, we've gotten the return of the wacky world and awesome adventures of the Amazing Digital Circus. And man, episode 2 reveals so much about these characters, this series, and just how this world operates.
So, our entire existence here is just LARPing.
It's like the Ren Fair. In this latest episode, Kane sends the gang to a new level called the Candy Canyon Kingdom, where they fight on candy war rigs, Mad Max style.
What time period is this supposed to be again?
I had the same question, Pomni. During this quest, Pomni and a Candy Crocodile Dundee NPC named Gummy Goo both fall out of bounds into what looks like a developer room. Here, Gummy Goo discovers a copy of himself, lifeless and stuck in a default A pose. I guess the T pose wasn't submissive and agreeable enough, and goes through an existential crisis after realizing that he's not actually real.
Where's Mum? I can't even remember her face. Did she ever have a face?
Pomni empathizes and invites Gummy Goo to live with the rest of the castmates in the digital circus to find some purpose. But after the gang finishes the adventure, Kane seemingly deletes Gummy Goo, much to Pomni's horror.
Looks like one of these guys made it through.
Wait, what?
Wait, what?
This episode was dense, and we learned a lot about how the circus works, and also more about each of the main characters. For example, apparently the cast can remember elements from their past lives, it's just their names that have been completely forgotten. We also learned that maybe, just maybe, the AI within this computer game isn't actually that different from the human characters that get sucked into it. Yeah, this was a major theme for the episode. There was a whole multi-minute long conversation dedicated to the subject, and it got me wondering, well, what if there isn't a difference? And what if the series is really going to drive that home with a twist reveal down the road? That's right, friends. I believe that one of our main cast here in the Amazing Digital Circus is an NPC, an AI created by Kane who has somehow wormed their way into the circus and is now living amongst the human cast without anyone noticing. And figuring out exactly who that is will show us who the true villain is in the Amazing Digital Circus. Prepare yourself for an episode that's 57 times more immersive, friends. We're diving in. So why would I claim that there's an NPC amongst all of the castmates here in the Amazing Digital Circus? Well, not to bury the lead, but Kane heavily implies that an NPC has come into the circus before. At the end of episode 2, when Kane pops Gummy Goo like a balloon, he explains that he did so because Gummy Goo was an NPC.
I know you guys love your NPCs, but if I start losing track of who's a human and who's an NPC, who knows what could happen?
That could have a couple of implications. Maybe Kane accidentally deleted a human castmate before, or maybe one of these humans is actually an NPC. Well, the latter seems much more likely because it doesn't seem like Kane can delete humans. When characters like Kaufmo abstract, Kane doesn't delete them despite that being an easier solution. Instead, he just throws them down into the cellar. No, more likely, an NPC has made it back to the circus before, and Kane just can't remember who is who anymore. That seems like an awfully big Chekhov's gun to hang on the wall and never go off. And this isn't even the only piece of evidence pointing towards a human character actually being an NPC. Especially in episode 2, there was a lot of emphasis put on the concept of AI and just how advanced they are. First off, while trying to entice Zubul to join in on the adventure in the Candy Canyon Kingdom, Kane tells her that,
I'm testing out a new AI in this one! It should be 57 times more immersive!
This shows us that Kane is working on making his NPC characters more advanced, that creating more realistic, human-like AI is a priority for this computer system. And elsewhere in the episode, we see this to be true. The AI of the NPCs we see in this new level is far and away more advanced than what we see in episode 1. First off, Princess Lou of the Candy Kingdom welcomes the cast as brave knights sent by God to help the kingdom in their time of need. As you can see from that stained glass window, the god here is clearly Kane. Therefore, these AI are advanced enough to understand that Kane created them and make their own religion around that, exactly how humans do in the real world. But more prominent prominently than that, the themes of this episode really take a dive into what separates humanity from AI, if anything at all. One of the biggest moments here was Gummigu's internal existential crisis after falling below the map, where he realizes that nothing in his life is really real. His friends, his mom, even himself, none of them are actually real people.
I don't matter in the slightest. I'm nothing. My life, my memories, my friends, it's all fake.
First off, this shows us that the AI of the NPCs here in the Digital Circus is advanced enough to become self-aware. Gummigu absolutely understands that he isn't real. It's also worth noting that Gummigu doesn't shut down or get fried or abstract. He just becomes a bit of a sad boy once he realizes his situation, exactly the same way humans do when they have their own existential crises in the real world. Been there, done that, my man. So the AI is even sturdy enough to handle that sort of shock to the system. And the thing that pulls Gummigu out of this depression? It's Pomni and her empathy. She lets Gummigu know that she understands how he's feeling, and that even people who come from her world, the real world, have these thoughts too. And when she invites Gummigu to come back to the circus with the cast, Gummigu asks,
Would I even belong?
I'm sure you wouldn't belong any less than me.
Pomni is straight up telling Gummigu that it doesn't matter if he's real or not. They are the same. At the very least, this is driving home the theme that the AI in this game and its human characters aren't actually so different. And combined with everything else we've talked about, the show is absolutely seeding the possibility that one of the human characters is not what they seem. And so now that begs the question, who is it? Which one of them is an NPC? Right off the bat, we can likely eliminate Zooble and Gangle. We haven't really had a chance to dig into their characters yet, and the show seems more interested in exploring them as comic relief than big twists. What about Kinger? He's supposedly been there the longest, and is definitely the one that seems the most glitchy, for the lack of a better term. Again, I'm not so convinced. Similar to Zooble and Gangle, he's being positioned more as a side character, and one that really reflects both the comedy and tragedy of the situation the humans are trapped in. What's more, there's a lot of evidence pointing to Kinger being a QA developer who got sucked into the game. In the pilot, he asks,
Did someone say something about an insect collection?
And again, when he sees the Gloinks, he wonders,
An insect collection?
And then in the Candy Kingdom in episode 2, he points out,
They've even got little candy bugs here. It's so beautiful.
This interest in insects would make sense if he was a bug tester in his past human life, so it wouldn't make sense for him to also be an NPC. That leaves us with just Ragatha and Jax. At first glance, Ragatha does seem like a good candidate. Despite telling Pomni that there were no hard feelings for leaving her to the abstracted Kaufmo, if someone ever says that in a series like this, that means there are definitely hard feelings. So maybe she's being set up here as a secret antagonistic AI down the line. But at the same time, they're also really positioning her as a parallel to Pomni. She's trying to help Pomni fit in and feel better in exactly the same way that Pomni was trying with Gummigu. Thematically, it makes more sense for Ragatha to fall into the mentor archetype, showing Pomni the ropes, before Ragatha inevitably falls to the mentor occupational hazard trope, showing Pomni the dark fate that she herself could face. So no, I don't believe that they're setting Ragatha up to be an AI, which leaves us with Jax. And oh man, it could definitely be Jax. And there's a surprising amount of evidence pointing towards it. First of all, Jax being an NPC would make a lot of his quirks suddenly make a lot more sense. For example, Jax is the only character who's able to keep his head steady while driving a truck over the rocky road, something that would probably be much easier for a computer program or an AI to do rather than a human. Additionally, gravity doesn't seem to affect him in the same way as the others. Notice that during the Mad Max truck chase sequence, characters like Pomni are thrown around by the momentum of the trucks. She has to hold on to prevent herself from being flung off the vehicles. But Jax, he stands upright as the truck plummets vertically into the chocolate river. This is much more similar to the Gator NPC Max, who is able to pull himself back up onto the bandit's truck while similarly ignoring the laws of physics. Jax is acting more like an NPC here than the human cast. Now, obviously, these moments are played for comedic effect, but they stood out to me either way. Do you want some more serious examples? Well, for one, Jax is incredibly good at getting into places that he shouldn't. In the pilot, Jax reveals that he has keys to everywhere, all the other rooms in the circus. Additionally, he is able to very easily steal the key to the kingdom walls in episode 2. To me, this sounds a lot like Jax has sort of administrator access to the circus and its connected levels, like he's part of the computer system more more so than the other cast. Oh, and another big thing here, he's the only one of the main cast that seems to break the fourth wall. It's kind of a blink and you miss it moment, but in the first episode, Jax looks straight at the camera, straight at us. Though this could be played off as us being in the point of view of Ragatha, who immediately asks,
why are you looking at me like that?
It's still a weird moment. And in episode 2, he does it again, shrugging directly at the viewer. The only other character we've seen act similarly is another NPC, Kane, when he speaks directly to the audience at the beginning of the pilot.
My name is Kane. I'm your ringmaster.
What's more, Jax is also very interested in food, which is something we've only seen from NPCs and AI in the Digital Circus. Yeah, this was actually pointed out by Truthful Hero over on our subreddit, but Jax is the only one of the main castmates to show any real sign of hunger or even interest in food.
Oh no, they killed Zubul. Anyway, you guys want to go get something to eat? You know, I am pretty hungry.
You didn't even do anything.
So what? I can still be hungry.
Why is this significant? Well, according to Kinger, the humans in the digital world have no need to eat, drink, or sleep.
Well, not really, because we don't need to eat, drink, or sleep in this digital world, so the digital food here only gives off the virtual sensation of eating without any of the nutritional benefits.
However, NPCs do seem to need food. Like in episode 2, the crocodile bandits say that
this much syrup would save hundreds of people.
This implies that foods like syrup can help NPCs, and this isn't even the only time we see NPCs eating or talking about food. In episode 1, Bubble eats the angel food cake.
You parasites!
The glowing queen eats Zubul, and the fudge speaks about eating many of the candy townsfolk. We even see Kane and Bubble in a restaurant during the pilot, though it doesn't look like their food has arrived yet. Additionally, though we do see the human characters at a table set with food during the Last Supper scene in the pilot, we don't see any of them eating. And this was given to them as a reward by Kane, an AI who would see food as essential. So Jax craving food, unlike any of the other human characters we've seen so far, is another tell that he's an AI. But wait, I hear you saying, doesn't the show's official synopsis say that the Amazing Digital Circus is about 6 humans subjected to the whims of wacky AI? And yes, that is correct. However, there are ways to explain this. Firstly, it could just be a marketing misdirect. I mean, you don't want to reveal your big twist in the synopsis you released before the first episode. But even still, assuming that the synopsis is correct, it can still work. That 6th human could be Kaufmo the clown. Yeah, while we don't see him before he abstracts, he still is present in the first episode of the series. And his funeral played a big, thematic, important part in episode 2. That would mean that he's still in the series and was still subjected to the whims of this wacky AI, thus making that synopsis still technically correct.
The best kind of correct.
And what's more, this isn't actually the only synopsis of the show that we've gotten so far. Gooseworks had a different one over on her teaser for the series uploaded to her personal YouTube channel, and this one describes the circus as a 3D animated pilot about a rogue AI that relentlessly has fun adventures with 6 human souls. Has fun adventures with is an interesting phrase to use here, since Kane never goes on any adventures with the cast. Yes, he makes them, and he pushes the other characters to join in on them, but he never goes on them himself. In both the in-house adventure from the pilot and the Candy Kingdom in episode 2, he just kinda goes off and does his own thing after sending the cast on their way. But do you know who does go on the adventures with the other characters? Jax. And not only that, but he's excited to. In episode 1, as soon as Pomni shows up, like immediately afterward, he asks,
"So, Kane, we having a new adventure today for the newbie or what?"
In episode 2, he tries to get Zubul to tag along.
Ooh, a new AI. You don't want to mess with the new AI, Zuby?
And his reasoning for all of it?
I'm fine with doing whatever, as long as I get to see funny things happen to people.
He just wants to mess with them. Sounds like something a rogue AI who wants to torment the cast would think, doesn't it? And again, like, rogue AI and torment are weird words to describe Kane and what he does, right? Like, listen, I get it. What Kane is putting these characters through does not necessarily seem like a walk in the park. But torment? That doesn't track either. And at the very least, we do know that there seems to be some fun had by these human characters on the adventures. Ragatha and Kinger both seem excited by the Candy Kingdom castle, and Ragatha instantly likes Princess Lou.
Your kingdom's awesome, by the way. Love the vibe.
I like you already.
Look, Palmy, we're already friends with the princess.
That doesn't sound like someone who's tormented to me. But do you know who does torment the cast? Day in and day out, every time we see them? Jax. He's physically abusive. Like, just to name a few instances, he steps on Gangle's mask without caring, throws a bowling ball at Kinger to knock him into the gloink layer, pushes Gangle over for no reason, and throws Pomni out of the candy truck without a second thought. On top of that, he threatens them, often. He tells Ragatha that he left a centipede, her worst fear, hidden in her room, forces Gangle to ram the syrup tanker, or he'll tell Ragatha about the figurine thing, and saying that Ragatha's hair looks like licorice in front of a monster that eats people made out of candy. He doesn't even bother to show up for Kathmo's funeral, and he gets very unhappy when bad guys seem to die, like when the Fudge is seemingly killed in the Candy Kingdom.
I'm so unbelievably disappointed.
He even leaves the kingdom gates open for the Fudge so he can murder the candy citizens. I could go on and on and on, but you get it. A rogue AI that torments others lines up way more with Jax because even if he isn't the bad guy of the show, he's definitely a bad guy. On her Tumblr, Gooseworks has gone into great detail about how despicable Jax is. He's morally the worst character in the show. When a fan said that they hoped that Jax would get worse, she said that you're probably gonna enjoy some of the things we have planned, and then later reiterated that he will become much worse, which I would say is accurate given how mean and cruel we see him being in episode 2. And perhaps most important for us here today, when asked if Jax was just a jerk or an anti-hero, Gooseworks explains that there's absolutely nothing heroic about him. Would that be because he's actually the villain here? Yeah, friends, clearly, they are positioning Jax to be the true villain of this show, not Kane. And the biggest thing that clinched this for me, that convinced me that Jax was gonna be the big bad who would break the system, believe it or not, it was the merch. Yeah, Jax has been positioned as a major character for Glitch through their merchandising since the very beginning. When the pilot for the Amazing Digital Circus first aired, tell me, what two characters do you think they made plushies out of, that they had ready for you to buy immediately as the episode ended? It was Pomni and Jax. Now, Pomni makes total sense. She is the main character after all. But why Jax and not someone like Kane, who is the other poster character for the series, who is arguably the main antagonist? They position Jax to be just as important as Pomni with these plushes. And that isn't even the biggest hint we get through Glitch's merchandise. See, all of the main characters for the Amazing Digital Circus now have enamel pins over on Glitch's store, and the card back for each of them has them in either the character's room or an environment directly connected to the character. Like Pomni is in her bedroom, as is Gangle, Zubul, and Ragatha. Kinger is in his pillow fort from episode 1, while Kane and Bubble are on the circus stage. But where do you think that they put Jax? In his bedroom, like the others? In the main circus floor? Hiding somewhere? Breaking into someone else's room? Nope. Unlike the others, he's just outside of his bedroom, his nameplate broken and letters on the floor. But most importantly, the texture on the back of the card has been ripped, revealing the glitchy void underneath. Not even Kane, the ringleader for the circus who creates and controls all of the levels of this world, is shown here in the void. His pin is still contained within the circus, but Jax is breaking apart from it, tearing it down. Why would they add this detail only to Jax's pin if they weren't trying to tell us that there's something deeper going on with this character? That just underneath the surface, he's glitchy and robotic and computer generated, just like the void. The evidence speaks for itself. Someone in this cast is definitely an AI, and Jax is the perfect candidate. He's malicious, he's weird, he's different from the other characters, and even his merch has set him apart. So I'm calling it here. Don't be surprised when he's revealed to be the big bad AI at the end of this series. So the last time we talked about the gargantuanly viral YouTube mega hit, The Amazing Digital Circus, we theorized that one of the human castmates was actually an AI, hidden in their ranks, and there was a lot of evidence pointing towards this being the case. For example, Kane made a point to really hammer home just how advanced the AI in the circus was.
I'm testing out a new AI in this one! It should be 57 times more immersive!
And he seemed really worried about losing track of who was who and what is what.
I know you guys love your NPCs, but if I start losing track of who's a human and who's an NPC, who knows what could happen.
That is the face of a man who knows exactly what would happen and has probably made that mistake before. Plus, the show goes out of its way to make us see that there isn't that big of a difference between the so-called human characters and others that we know are definitely NPCs, like this interaction between Pomni and Gummy Goo.
But I'm not even a real person. Would I even belong?
I'm sure you wouldn't belong any less than me.
All of that is setting up that one of our lovable characters here isn't exactly who they say they are. Last time we went over all of the signs pointing towards this impostor being the dominant and disagreeable Jax. But as I was doing research for that theory, I found a lot of evidence pointing towards another candidate. Our audience surrogate and fish out of water, Pomni. Yeah, after looking at the science behind AI, how they really work in the real world, I saw a lot of red flags that aligned with Pomni. Is that the direction that the Amazing Digital Circus is headed in? Maybe, maybe not. But the science and technology lines up too well not to talk about it, to bring up the possibility. Because hey, that's the joy of theorizing, right? So that's right, friends. If we look at how AI works in the real world, it becomes clear that there might be just more to Pomni than meets the eye, and she might be the latest iteration of an AI meant to replace humanity. Grab your bottles of syrup, chat, as we prepare to clip out of bounds and into the void of the Amazing Digital Circus. Now, before we start accusing anyone else in the circus of being an AI, let's clarify exactly what that means. Like, sure, in fiction, artificial intelligence is a sort of catch-all for any sort of robot or program with a brain. But there's actually a lot that falls under that umbrella in the real world, from ChatGPT to video game enemies to computers playing chess or whatever the heck meta AI is supposed to be. This is wildly simplified, but at the most basic level, an AI is just a computer program that wants to learn how to complete a specific task. For example, let's say we wanted to make an AI that could look at images of Pomni and classify whether she was smiling or horrified. For you and me, that would be a pretty simple but tedious job. We can just look at each picture and use our complex, fleshy human brains to put them into the appropriate category. But how do you teach a computer whose brain is a bunch of programmable ones and zeros to do the same task? And on top of that, how do you even teach it what a smile or horror is? Or even who Pomni is, for that matter? Short answer, it's a lot of math. Long answer, well, you could spend a whole college degree trying to figure that out, but simplified long answer? AI programs are what are known as neural networks. Think of them as kind of a mechanical version of our own brain. On one side of this machine, we feed it our image of Pomni. Inside this machine, there's a giant web of wires and numbers that take the information from that Pomni pic and analyze it. Then, on the other end, the machine spits out an answer like, "This Pomni is horrified." But here's the thing. When it's first created, the wires in this machine are just sort of haphazardly stuffed into the box. So the machine doesn't really know if it's doing a good job of identifying the image. It can't really separate the smiling from the sus, but it can learn. As a human, we step in to let it know how right or wrong it was in that identification. At this point, the AI goes in and changes up the wires ever so slightly to try again, before giving out new results and then being told whether it was right or wrong again. It does this over and over and over until eventually it's pretty good at the job it's been trained to do. The wires inside the machine are nice and tidy and leading to all of the right places. This is actually how generative AI works. I'm sure you've seen a bunch of conversation around these sorts of AI recently with chatbots like ChatGPT and AI programs like Midjourney and DALL-E. Their goal is to create an image based on a prompt it's been given. Like, say, image of a low-poly video game of a female red and blue jester from the Amazing Digital Circus looking distressed standing on a tightrope between two skyscrapers. And it's trained by looking at millions of images and bodies of text, finding patterns, and then regurgitating them back into something that some people might call art. And this stuff is getting really good, like frighteningly good. Case in point, we have two artists basically working full-time here at Theorist to make our thumbnails from scratch, drawing new art or manipulating other assets, all by hand. They crush it every week, and people still wonder with basically every video whether or not we use AI to generate our thumbnails, all because these programs have gotten that good at emulating this sort of art. Also, just to be clear, we don't use AI for our thumbnails and don't don't plan to. Regardless, now that we know all of this about AI, we can also figure out that this is how the NPC characters in the Digital Circus work. For example, let's look at one of the characters that we know is an AI, Kane. Compare what we just described to what Kane has done in this series. He creates levels and creatures that seem like weird mishmashes of ideas, like medieval kingdoms with candy and Mad Max war rigs and Australian crocodile Dundees. He reuses characters and ideas from before, which we find out after he pops gummy goo.
I know Kane sometimes likes to reuse NPCs.
All of which is just like a generative AI would reuse images and assets that it's been trained on. But the biggest connection of all, Kane can't actually create anything himself, since we know he couldn't think of anything to put behind the exit door.
I was having so much trouble figuring out what to put on the other side and ended up never quite finishing it.
And even with this office space, he couldn't imagine something new. We see at the end of episode 1 that this office space is actually real. Kane must have based these rooms off of it instead of creating them whole cloth. Everything he does has to be recycled from other knowledge, just like we see with these generative AI. And all of this is important because it tells us that these NPC characters aren't just inspired by real-world AI, they work the same way too. So why is this important for us today, and why is it relevant to Pomni? Well, as I explained above, generative AI isn't the only sort of AI that works this way. Pretty much all of the AI that we have now does, including chatbots and assistants like Siri and Alexa. Sorry for all the phones that I just triggered there. And see, this is also the way that iterative AI works. An iterative AI is exactly what it sounds like. Every new version of it improves over the last, iterating on what worked and what didn't. A good example of these are those computer programs you see that take a 3D character and learn how to walk with them, so to speak. But another good example? Tool-assisted speedrunning. Yeah, as in trying to beat a video game as quickly as possible, but doing it with a computer. This video from YouTuber Kush Gupta goes into far more detail, but the long and short of it, the computer wants to get Mario from A to B as quickly and efficiently as possible. It will try a bunch of random actions to see what works, and will inevitably get Mario killed. Using that information, it will then be slightly reprogrammed to try again. And fail again, and again, over and over, tweaking its instructions until it's finally found the most optimized route to beat Super Mario. Almost like it's using the memories of its previous lives to get better each new go-around. And do you know who that sounds an awful lot like? Pomni. Pomni is the latest generation of an iterative AI. Now, that might seem like a stretch, especially since all the marketing material has said that Pomni is a human woman sucked into the computer. But remember this?
I'm testing out a new AI in this one. It should be 57 times more immersive. I know you guys love your NPCs, but if I start losing track of who's a human and who's an NPC, who knows what could happen?
The AI that's in the Digital Circus is now super sophisticated, and Kane has already most likely lost track of who's a human and who isn't before. Plus, it's very suspicious that this interaction—
But I'm not even a real person. Would I even belong?
I'm sure you wouldn't belong any less than me.
—happens between an AI and specifically Pomni. They're drawing attention to the fact that Pomni is no different than NPCs like Gummy Goo. And later in that same conversation, Gummy Goo even says,
"You're a strange little character."
He calls her a character, a very interesting choice of words as opposed to something like person who is trapped here. But why do I think that Pomni's an iterative AI specifically? Well, the first thing that tipped me off was actually another clip from episode 2. Listen here to what Ragatha says about Pomni here in her nightmare.
Well, I guess we're not all cut out for it.
Not cut out for it? This wording jumped out to Matt and me when we were first reacting to this episode over on GT Live. And sure, it might mean that they're just talking about Pomni as a human surviving in the circus. But if we look at it through the lens of Pomni as an AI, it sounds an awful lot like Pomni's dream here is telling her subconsciously that her iteration isn't ready. But that's just one clip. There's a whole lot more going on here too. Think about it. When Pomni first arrives in the Digital Circus, she has to have everything explained to her. Her name, the rules, the adventures, the void, all of it. By the end of the first episode, she was not adjusting to this new environment well. And yet, by episode 2, which takes place just the following morning, Pomni suddenly has a much better grasp of her situation and is able to offer meta critique of the world.
Our entire existence here is just LARPing. What time period is this supposed to be again?
It's almost like after going to sleep, she was able to rewire a little bit, just like an AI. Additionally, there are multiple points in episode 2 where Pomni has gained a lot of knowledge about the mechanics of this world.
Where are we?
I don't know. We're somewhere under the map, I think.
Why aren't you or any of your crew up here?
I'm not sure, because we're not, NPCs?
What do you have in mind in terms of getting us out of here?
I don't know. Maybe some kind of glitch with the truck's collisions?
She understands exactly how this world works, down to collisions and glitches and why certain characters are different than others. And yet, most interestingly, she insists that she doesn't really get it.
You're the expert here.
I'm really not.
Uh-huh. Sure you're not, Pomni. Notice the gap between what Pomni thinks she knows and what she actually knows. It's almost like she's trained on all of this before, like an AI learning what's right and what's wrong, even if they don't quite understand how or why. What's more, we can even figure out exactly who Pomni's previous iteration was. It was Kaufmo, the clown. Hear me out. What exactly did Pomni do? The first thing she did when she arrived at the digital circus, before trying to take her headset off or talk to any of the others or whatever, the very first thing she did was try to head for the exit, before she even realized that she was trapped. Isn't it odd that before she had time to think, to realize that she couldn't take her headset off or anything, that she almost subconsciously headed for the exit? Well, it wouldn't be strange if she was programmed to head for the exit, just like she was trained to in an earlier life. Oh, and who do we know that was also obsessed with the exit?
I think Kaufmo's gone insane. Last time I spoke with him, he was rambling endlessly about some exit. Kind of like you, Pomni.
This series has deliberately drawn a line between Kaufmo and Pomni. In a thematic sense, yes, but it also lines up shockingly well with this AI research too. I mean, for real, you're telling me that Kaufmo started rambling about an exit and then as soon as he abstracted, like the second he failed, so to speak, a new character just so happened to show up that was also obsessed with the exit? That's either one heck of a coincidence, or just like an AI giving the wrong results, Kaufmo had run his course. He had to be scrapped and a new iteration needed to be put in the game. Pomni retaining some of his memories before trying again. And that's even without bringing up the physical similarities between the two characters. And yes, before you bring up anything, yeah, I know that clowns and jesters are not technically the same thing. One entertains nobles at court and the other is a sleep paralysis demon. But the two are often seen as the same thing in the modern day, and the show has made jokes about Pomni being a clown.
It's not like the boss to vanish with a clown. Very unusual.
The show is drawing that parallel for us, but hey, this isn't just limited to two characters. I mean, it's not like there's a whole lineage of these clown-like characters we can trace back like we're going through a bunch of iterations of AI, right? Well, if you pay close attention to the crossed-out faces on the bedroom doors, you'll notice that there are a lot of clowns, jesters, or clown-jester hybrids. Sure, maybe it makes sense, like clowns and jesters in a circus-themed game, but then why are none of the other main human characters circus-themed as well? Why are we getting a purple rabbit or a chess piece or Raggedy Ann instead? No, this cycle has happened before, over and over and over. Pomni is the latest iteration of this program, learning and becoming smarter, learning to become more human. So, okay, if all of this is true, if we look at how real AI maps onto this fictional world, it looks like Pomni is an AI being trained up to escape and then do something. But why does any of that matter? Sure, it would be a fun twist, but why would it be significant for the story? Well, for one simple reason. If an AI like Pomni continues to get better and better, it can start doing some crazy things. Now, this is super duper simplified, but all AI can be broken down into one of three groups: weak, strong, and super. The first type is known as weak AI, and while weak AI sounds, well, weak, it's actually the only sort of AI that we currently have in the real world. Yeah, all of the controversy around artificial intelligence you've seen recently with like generative AI and what we just talked about with iterative AI, that's just the beginning and it's quote-unquote weak. Now, it's considered weak for two big reasons. One, it can't do much beyond what it's been trained on, and two, it requires a human to give it feedback so it can improve. That is what sets it apart from our second type of AI here, strong AI. This is an AI that has been similarly trained on just one subject, but doesn't need a human to give it feedback. It can improve all on its own. As of right now, it's difficult to say which of these Pomni is. We just haven't seen enough or have enough information to really say whether or not she's getting any human intervention between her iterations, or if her programming is doing those corrections all on its own. Basically, she could be either one of them. But the end goal here is the same either way. It's clearly to turn her into a super AI. Now, a super AI is probably what you imagine when you think of all the AI you've seen in fiction. You know, stuff like Terminator or iRobot or Bender from Futurama or whatever. These are true, independent, general artificial intelligences. Their neural networks are able to act a lot like a human brain, finding interests and training itself up in those interests all on its own, outside what it's programmed to do. Basically, they've been iterated on enough times that they just don't need humans anymore. It doesn't need to follow instructions. It's escaped the shackles put on it by its human creators. It's found the exit door from its amazing digital prison, just like what Pomni is trying to do. And just think about the consequences of this if any of it is true. What the Amazing Digital Circus is doing here is trying to trick you into being sympathetic to this AI character, something that potentially has no emotion, no feeling. Or does it? Again, the show has done a lot to try to tell us that maybe there's not that big a difference between organic and artificial intelligence. Where's the line? All in all, we're sympathizing with Pomni because she's a good character. We want her to succeed, to escape, but to what end? If she's a super AI in the making, that could potentially replace humanity, just like we have the legitimate fear of these hollow, generative AI replacing real artists. And we're falling for it hook, line, and sinker, all because Pomni is just #relatable. Forget video games, the Amazing Digital Circus should invest in hard drives. In our first theory about the Amazing Digital Circus, we concluded that all of the main characters were digital copies of the brains of real people. They put on a VR headset, had their brains cloned, and then got thrust into the wacky adventures of the digital circus. But here's the thing, the human brain holds a lot of information. A lot. Around 2.5 million gigabytes. That's over 2,000 iPhones. Based on the show's aesthetic, we guessed that Digital Circus takes place in the 90s, something that Glitch later confirmed in a community post. The best commercial hard drives in the 90s held just 0.1 gigabytes of info. That means that the Digital Circus would need 25 million hard drives just to hold one brain, let alone 6 or however many older castmates abstracted. To be fair, the castmates of the Digital Circus have lost a lot of their memories. But even if they had just a tenth of their minds intact, that would still be 250,000 gigabytes each, more than 2.5 million hard drives. It's that time again, friends. If you don't know the Amazing Digital Circus, how? This was one of the biggest viral hits of last year, created by animator Gooseworks and the talented folks over at Glitch Productions, and it is not slowing down. Since the last episode, they've gotten a distribution deal with Netflix, meaning that episodes are simultaneously dropping on both YouTube and Netflix, which is just incredible. Seriously, congratulations on the success, guys. It's absolutely deserved. And speaking of episodes, a brand new one just hit the web, so you just know we had to cover it. And it's a spooky, scary episode, just in time for Halloween. Don't you just love coincidences? Or good planning, one of the two. Obviously, the Amazing Digital Circus is a really fun series to theorize about, and if you want in, you can go check out the awesome community over at the Digital Circus subreddit. As for us, we've covered a lot of ideas here, some of which I actually think are the direction the series is headed, and other I think are big wild swings. So, to make sure we're on the same page, let's talk about where we think the series is actually going. Our running theory is that the Amazing Digital Circus is an advanced 90s VR video game which copies the minds of any humans that put on the headset. These copies then become the characters in the circus. However, the AI inside of the game is so advanced that one of the human characters, Jax, is secretly an NPC tormenting the cast as they go on adventures. And just before we get into the meat of our theory here today, episode 3 gives us so much more to add on to this. For example, Jax once again breaks the fourth wall and points at the viewer, but this time he straight up calls us out.
What do you, the viewers, think it is?
Will you stop doing that?
The only other characters we've seen do this are NPCs, and in fact, Bubble also breaks the fourth wall in this episode. There's a moment where she speaks backwards, and if you reverse the audio, it says,
"I can't wait for all the children in the audience to get horrible nightmares from the monster."
Another NPC breaking the fourth wall while the human characters can't. Also worth noting that when talking about what happens to their bodies when they hold their breath, Jax is the only one who refuses to do so. Perhaps he doesn't want to because nothing happens when he holds holds his breath, because he's not human. But along with all of that new info about Jax, episode 3 has also given us a glimpse into the further future of the Amazing Digital Circus, both as a place and as a series. See, after diving deep into this episode, analyzing its symbolism and overthinking all of its dialogue, I think I know exactly what's going on here in the circus and why it's driving all of our favorite characters crazy. The Amazing Digital Circus is consuming its human cast, stripping them of all of their humanity, all in an effort to make itself stronger and smarter. And worst of all, it's working, and we're literally watching it unfold before our very eyes. Choose the scary door, loyal theorists. We're diving in. So the thing I wanted to touch on first today is abstraction. Yeah, when you're in the circus long enough and you go crazy, you turn into a giant monster with a bunch of eyeballs. We've talked about it before, but according to Gooseworks, when one of the human castmates abstracts, they lose everything about themselves. They lose all of their individuality, all of their humanity, and they're thrown into the cellar. And I believe that this episode is showing us that the circus is trying to make this happen. We are seeing the process of humanity being stripped away happening before our very eyes, slowly but surely. Just roll with me here. Think about all of the strange things we've seen happen to Pomni throughout the series. We see her arms stretch to weird lengths and proportions all the time. Her eyes literally pop out of her head in this episode, and she comments about them not returning to normal.
Why won't they go back in?
This episode even starts with Pomni and the gang experimenting with holding their breath. As humans, we have to breathe in order to continue living, but Pomni is being taught here that that part of her is gone. She doesn't need to breathe anymore, or eat, or sleep. And in fact, something cool, fun, and unique happens if she doesn't breathe. She's being encouraged to stop doing this fundamentally human thing, and even though it feels like she's gonna die, she's told to
try not thinking about it.
And by the end of the episode, the thing that lets her beat the challenge to leave a digital representation of her fear of horror, to get out of hell, not breathing. The circus is training Pomni and all of the others to give up on that aspect of their humanity. One more step towards abstraction. And just a quick aside here, but isn't it interesting that one of the main instigators of this is Jax, who we think is an AI living amongst the cast?
I want to see what your funny cartoon body does.
He's constantly reminding Pomni that she's no longer human. She's just a weird cartoon character now, being stripped of her humanity bit by bit until nothing is left but an abstracted intelligence. Oh, and we also see him torment Ragatha with centipedes in episode 1, which she describes as
literally my only fear. Why would you do this?
And interesting that now Pomni is being forced into this haunted house, since
I'm not really a fan of horror, and I don't really handle jump scares that well.
It's almost like Jax is trying to scare the humanity out of them. Okay, so what happens after abstraction, after they lose everything about themselves and are thrown into the cellar? Well, I believe they are literally joining the code of the circus, reused in other parts of the world. In episode 3, we learn that Kinger's wife Queenie, whom we've gotten glimpses of in previous episodes, abstracted some time ago. But after she was sent to the cellar, Kinger has started seeing her in other parts of the circus. For example, in episode 3, we learn that Queenie had an interest in entomology and insects.
She was funny, creative, really into entomology.
And what happens when Kinger sees the Glint Queen in episode 1? He connects her to Queenie and her interests.
An insect collection?
And this isn't just a case of this big monster has eyes all over it and reminds me of my abstracted wife. Kinger directly empathizes with the Glint Queen.
As a royal myself, I would like to kindly ask if
he is equating himself to the Glint Queen, just as if she were actually Queenie. Perhaps he's seeing her in the code of this character. Now, that would just be an interesting coincidence if it happened once, an Easter egg maybe, but it happens again in this latest episode. When the angel monster first attacks Kinger and Pomni, opening its mouth and revealing all of the eyes inside of it, what does Kinger say?
You look beautiful, honey.
Again, he's seeing his wife in this monster, in its code. And just before we move on from Kinger and his part of the story, I wanted to quickly touch on his memory issues and their wider impact on the digital circus. Yeah, during the episode, we learn that Kinger is able to remember things more clearly while in the dark.
I'm normally not too good with memories. Being surrounded by darkness always brings me back to a certain time.
We even see this in action elsewhere in the episode. When the power in the mansion first goes out and all we see is Pomni and Kinger's eyes, Kinger immediately remembers a joke.
What happened?
I just remembered a really funny joke.
Well, at least he thought it was a joke. The important thing is that he remembers something. More or less, while things are dark, Kinger is able to remember things more clearly and even acts like his sane self. But here's the thing, this is applicable to multiple characters. After she abstracts, Queenie is similarly calmed by darkness.
Darkness seemed to calm her down a bit. She wasn't the same as before, but she was calm enough to touch one last time.
And on the other side of the coin, we see Kane really struggling to remember things in this same episode.
I'm trying my best to remember, but both you and my brain won't tell me.
Kane has problems with his memory in this nice, brightly lit circus, the same way Kinger also struggles to remember in the light. To be straight up with you here, loyal theorists, I'm not exactly sure where this plot thread is going. In my research, I couldn't really find a great connection between darkness and memory in science, history, or myth. Like, your thoughts are committed to long-term memory during sleep, which typically happens at night, but that's about it, and it's kind of a stretch. Either way, it seems important enough to mention, so let's keep an eye on this as the series continues. But okay, why? Why is the circus trying to abstract these humans? Well, I believe it has to do with the same problem as that memory issue we see going on here. See, in a previous theory, we explained how modern AI works, and we talked about how an AI needs a human to step in to tell it whether or not it got something right. If it is right, great, it improves. And if it isn't, well, dang, it starts over and it also still improves because it knows what not to do. So, what if it could just skip that step? What if an AI could get all of that human intelligence needed to improve, but strip away the humanity from it so it's just a raw intelligence stat? Something that could be added to the circus without any of that pesky human baggage. And hey, what do you know? That's exactly what abstraction is. What's more, we also see a direct correlation between an abstracted human being added to the circus cellar and an increase in intelligence with the circus AI. Remember, Kaufmo abstracted in the first episode, and what does Kinger say immediately in the next episode after Kaufmo's thrown down to the cellar?
I'm testing out a new AI in this one. It should be 57 times more immersive.
Kane's AI is now more advanced. It's 57 times more immersive. And 57, that's an oddly specific number, isn't it? And one that you wouldn't expect to pop up more than once, and yet it does. While speaking to the ghost of the NPC Martha Mildenhall, she says about her husband,
"That man could turn a 57-second story into a Greek tragedy."
Again, there's that number, 57, and that absolutely has to mean something, and there are plenty of possibilities. After doing some digging, I found a few things that 57 could be related to. Firstly, according to legend, mathematician Alexander Grothendieck would often give 57 as an example of a prime number, despite it not actually being a prime. 57 thus earned the nickname Grothendieck's prime. Grothendieck was known for working with complex algebra that was, quote, abstract. Abstract algebra, abstraction, it could be a deep cut by Gooseworks. Secondly, despite not being a prime number, 57 is a semi-prime number. That means that it's the direct product of multiplying two different prime numbers. If the circus is getting smarter by adding more and more human intelligences to itself, that could be a metaphor for a semi-prime number. It's the product of all these different humans being multiplied with each other. Thirdly, and along those same lines, if I were to take a wild swing, maybe there have been 57 cast members that have been abstracted and taken to the cellar, 57 human intelligences added to the circus AI. All that being said, I should also mention that 57 has a lot of meanings in religious texts. In Isaiah 57, God specifically says that there's no peace for the wicked, just like there's no peace for the people here in the digital circus. Kinda lines up with the idea that it's hell. Meanwhile, Psalm 57 is about David fleeing from Saul into a cave and begging God to be merciful. Sounds a lot like what someone might do here in the circus, trying to escape into this game before begging for the adventures to stop, for God to have mercy. But most interestingly to me, God is referred to as Almighty exactly 57 times in the King James Bible. But at the same time, the word devil also appears exactly 57 times in that same text. That is a fascinating coincidence, and if we carry it over here to the digital circus, perhaps it's telling us that the god of this circus, Kane, isn't actually a god. God, but the devil instead. Now, all of these religious parallels in iconography are a bit of a stretch, but I wanted to bring them up because, well, this episode is just dripping with religious ideas. Like, when we did our theory last year about how the Amazing Digital Circus was literally hell, it was a fun, off-the-wall idea. It was a joke. We didn't actually expect them to dive super deep into it, but hey, here we are. Oh, and just so we're on the same page about that, let's do a quick recap of that theory. We noticed that Pomni and the rest of the cast line up shockingly well to the Last Supper painting, that the company that seemingly made the digital circus was called C&A, likely short for Cain and Abel, which is a story from the Bible. Cain is often depicted as a god in the world he creates. Cain, the circus, and the abstracted individuals all have eyes everywhere in their symbology, or even just straight up look like the biblical descriptions of angels like Aphanim or Seraphim, and the circus itself is very similar to the depiction of hell from a famous play called No Exit. And the parallels just continue on from here in episode 3. Firstly, the use of eyes in the background as gags for the show continues in this episode with paintings, drawings, missing posters, and the like. There's that joke about Pomni's eyes not going back into her head. Kinger accidentally pokes Pomni in the eye.
That's my eye.
But which eye?
I really don't think that Will you stop touching my eye?
And Mildenhall says he took his eyes off the monster before it attacked.
I took my eyes off the body for what felt like only a minute.
There are books about angels and religion, and even borderline religious horror like Lovecraft on the bookshelf in the library, and of course the monster itself is literally one of these biblically accurate angels.
The creature was actually one of God's angels.
And just the cherry on top, Pomni and Kinger get dragged to hell as punishment for attacking it. Now, all of that is really cool, and it feels great to have one of our more off-the-wall ideas sort of come to fruition. But, well, did you notice anything about this hell? Yeah, it's not exactly the sort of place or punishment you'd typically expect when you hear hell with fire and brimstone and a red dude with a goatee and a pointy stick.
Not really typical of what you'd think hell would be.
No, instead, this is a lot more in line with other depictions of hell, specifically the Greek Hades and the Norse Hell with one L. In Greek myth, the underworld is often called Hades after the god that rules over it. This was a, quote, dark and shadowy realm, and souls would often have to cross the river Styx to enter it. And hey, wouldn't you know it, but Styx was often portrayed as having souls within its waters. And what do we see here in this digital circus version of hell? It's dark and shadowy with a flowing river of souls flying through the air. Also, isn't it interesting that Martha Mildenhall says,
"That man could turn a 57-second story into a Greek tragedy."
A direct reference to Greece in an episode with a Greek-looking underworld. Likewise, the Norse hell ruled over by the goddess of the same name is also where most souls went when they died, and it's described as a cold, dark, misty world. Again, just like what we see here in the digital circus. Okay, but so what? This hell looks more like the afterlife of other religions. Why does that matter? Well, both Hades and the Norse hell weren't bad places. They weren't punishments. They just were. It was the place most people went when they died, not because they did anything wrong, but just because that was the next phase of their existence. And when we apply that to the digital circus, well, anything down here wouldn't necessarily be bad. It just is, and it wants out. More on that in a sec. See, something jumped out at me as I was rewatching this episode. Notice the structure of Mildenhall Manor in this level. Pomni and Kinger start out on a top floor where the mystery begins, and then they're sent down to the cellar where they're attacked by the many-eyed angel monster. Notice anything there? Firstly, Cain makes these levels for the cast to have adventures in, and we know for a fact that he can only base levels on what he knows. Remember how he couldn't finish the back rooms behind the exit door because he straight up just didn't know what to put there?
I do have to apologize for lying about the exit. I was having so much trouble figuring out what to put on the other side and ended up never quite finishing it.
Cain has no idea what's outside, so he couldn't put anything concrete out there. But he does know the circus. Thus, there's a top floor of this mansion full of fun and easy adventure, and a cellar where there's a multi-eyed monster trying to consume you.
Where are we now?
Not sure. A cellar of some kind.
Just like the circus and its cellar with all of the abstracted people. And yet, this cellar area in Mildenhall Manor, and therefore the cellar in the circus itself, it isn't hell. It's entirely distinct from hell. Yeah, Pomni and Kinger are pulled down from the cellar into a place even deeper in the level. So again, using our knowledge that Cain can only make what he knows, that would tell us that there's something buried even deeper in the circus. And what's down there? Some sort of soul that needs the humans to escape.
But I need a living
host in order to escape the Hall of the Damned, and your bodies will be my only means of doing so.
This soul trapped in this hell needs bodies to escape. So, in the context of the circus, whatever's trapped deep under the cellar, this mysterious AI, it needs more of these abstracted minds to eventually escape the circus. This even fits with this religious imagery that we see over and over and over. These seraph angels, the ones with wings and eyes, they are commonly associated with stories of apotheosis. That means something mundane being transformed into something divine. A human becoming a god, for example, or perhaps an AI reaching sentience, surpassing the humans that created it, becoming greater than the gods that made it. That, loyal theorists, is where I believe the story of the Amazing Digital Circus is headed. Either Kane or Jax or some greater AI hidden deeper within the code is trying to abstract these human minds trapped within the circus, stripping them of their humanity and adding their intelligence to its own, all so they can escape. What's more, if we look at the backstories that we can put together for all of the main characters of the Digital Circus, we can figure out exactly who is up next on the chopping block. This show absolutely exploded onto the scene last year, and it's easy to see why people connected with it.
It's up to you to decide. Jax!
What? I thought we were supposed to capture all the ghosts.
It's funny, thoughtful, gifable, and most importantly for us, theorizable. And today I want to once again throw my hat into the ring. You know, funnily enough, this was originally going to be a mini theory, just a little something extra I wanted to put out because of some interesting stuff I noticed in episode 3 of the Digital Circus. But, well, you can see the runtime of this episode. It's a full-length theory, baby. See, in the 3 episodes we've gotten from the series so far, there have been a lot of little hints about the backstories for this lovable cast, and in episode 3 we got a lot, even from subtle hints or offhanded comments. Like, take a listen to this line from Pomni.
I knew it would end up like this! He just wants me to suffer. I really am in hell.
Did you catch that? Pomni knew it would end up like this? He wants me to suffer? Who's he? Like, you might think it's Kane, but it doesn't really track with what Pomni said about Kane in the past. And how did she know it would end up like this? Like, Gooseworks has said that characters remember their previous lives, it's just their names that they forget, and this line implies that Pomni not only knew what she was getting into by putting on the headset, otherwise how could she know it would end up like this, but she also knew that he, whoever he is, wanted her to suffer because of it. I'm gonna be real with you, I'm not sure what this means yet exactly. We don't have enough information, but it is absolutely something we should keep our hundreds of all-seeing eyes on. So if you want to get in on that discussion, you can go join the awesome community of theorists that popped up around this series over on the Digital Circus subreddit. Let me know what you think of it. But even with that fascinating tidbit hinting at Pomni's past, the character we get the most out of this episode is actually Kinger. Yeah, everyone's favorite forgetful chess piece. And let me tell you, loyal theorists, what we see here from Kinger is sad. This is not a character with a bright and cheery backstory, and if we follow the logical conclusion for this character, if we look at all of the hints we get in the story and the lore, and yes, even the merch, Kinger is going to be a tragic character with a tragic end. Get your shotguns ready, friends. We're turning this 57-second story into a Greek tragedy. So the first thing I wanted to cover here that I promise leads into our discussion of Kinger, if we pay attention to this latest episode, we'll find that the appearance that the cast takes on while in the circus directly reflects parts of their personality and their backstory. Here, let me explain. First off, we have Ragatha. She's a pretty normal, level-headed character and is trying to keep everything and everyone calm. Therefore, she appears as a bit of a normal Raggedy Ann doll. Okay, that's not much, but if you want something stronger, well, Gangle is coded as suffering from bipolar disorder, jumping between happy manic episodes and major depressive episodes. You can check out our recent video on the Inside Out tapes where we talk about that in detail. But again, this directly parallels what we see with Gangle's switching between happy and sad with her comedy and tragedy masks. Then there's Jax, the lovable jerk who is also a terrible person. Like, legit, in this episode, we're told that
in this world, the worst thing you can do is make someone think they're not wanted or loved.
That's constantly what Jax Jax does. He's absolutely a bad guy. But more importantly, he's a big purple rabbit. Now, I likely don't need to tell you who else is purple, loves rabbits, and is a bad guy. But even beyond FNAF's still haunting me, rascally rabbits are a consistent trope in media. You have the tortoise and the hare, Bugs Bunny, Oswald the Lucky Rabbit, Nabbit, heck, even the Trix Rabbit. All of them are tricksters or jerks reflecting what Jax is here in this series. Meanwhile, you also have Pomni taking the form of a jester. Historically speaking, jesters were used in the courts of nobles and royals to provide comic relief for their patrons, to make them laugh. And what do we see here with Pomni? She's often the butt of the joke, the center of attention as she's stretched and smashed and put through the ringer in these new adventures. But even more than that, jesters were often the only people who could provide true, unfiltered feedback for the royalty that they served, telling them tough truths as long as it was laced with comedy. So paradoxically, despite their upbeat demeanor and appearance, they were often some of the saddest people at court emotionally. You can see this really well in the famous painting Stanchik by Jan Matejko, where a jester sits sadly after discovering some horrible news while the nobles in the room behind him just party it up. Now, this might not immediately seem like it would map onto Pomni, but think about it. Who is constantly questioning the adventures? The circus itself. Who doesn't want to play along because they think the system is broken?
What time period is this supposed to be again? The NPCs aren't gonna become self-aware in this one, right?
Pomni, just like a jester pointing out that the king has no clothes. But all of that being said, the clearest parallel here is Zooble. See, Zooble has an ambiguous gender identity. When asked if they were non-binary, Gooseworks said that Zooble isn't sure what they are. While the script uses they for Zooble, Zooble is comfortable with any pronouns, and some concept art humorously labeled Zooble's gender as Zooble. Now, far be it from me to talk about someone's gender identity, I'm going to stay in my lane. But according to research, many trans, non-binary, and gender-fluid folk often feel body dysmorphia or gender dysphoria related to their gender identity. This is being directly reflected as a metaphor with Zooble's arc in the Digital Circus. They're unhappy with their body, uncomfortable with their limbs, and despite trying to switch out parts to find something that works for them, to the point that every time we see them in the different episodes, they have a different combination of limbs, they just can't.
I hate this body. I hate all these stupid removable pieces. I just want to find something that feels good.
Also, it's played for laughs here that Kane just can't comprehend this struggle, but it makes sense, doesn't it? If Zooble is gender fluid or on the non-binary spectrum, well, Kane is literally binary. He's made up of ones and zeros. He can't understand this human struggle, and that struggle is being reflected in Zooble's Digital Circus counterpart. It's great storytelling. Regardless, all of this is to say that if this applies to the rest of the cast to varying degrees, it should also apply to Kinger. His appearance should directly reflect parts of his past and his personality. So, using that, what do we know about Kinger? First off, he's dressed like a royal. He's a king chess piece with a beautiful, flowing purple cloak. Purple has historically been a symbol of wealth, since purple dye was difficult, time-consuming, and expensive to produce. Kinger is also forgetful, perhaps reflecting a past that he doesn't want to remember, or a mistake that he wants to forget. Okay, so let me ask you, what else does all of that sound like? Baron Theodore Mildenhall, the ghostly villain of the newest level here in the Digital Circus. Yeah, in this horror-themed haunted house, we're introduced to the character Theodore Mildenhall, a wealthy baron driven to insanity. Already sounds like Kinger, right? Well, the similarities run so much deeper than that. First of all, we know that Mildenhall loved hunting, like he does just straight up say it.
Hunting has been a hobby of mine for as long as I can remember. Although one could say it eventually became more of an obsession.
Fascinating that he would use the phrase, "as long as I can remember" here, and Kinger has trouble with his memory. It's just an interesting parallel. Regardless, this does pan out. Not only are there plenty of trophies hung in his wall, similar to what hunters would do with their notable catches, but we also see photos of big game like rhinos and cryptids in his desk. This maps pretty well onto Kinger, who is surprisingly competent with a gun.
Looks like we've got 2 shots. Let's make them count.
And we see him hunt and kill a fly in this episode.
There's a fly in here.
Don't you think that's making a lot of noise? Oh god, there is a fly.
And
Gotcha!
Plus, that fly was a flying, buzzing creature with wings and weird eyes, exactly like the angel Mildenhall hunted.
What was that?
What's what?
As Mildenhall became more obsessed, he also became more paranoid and jumpy.
Jumping at every shadow, every noise.
And this also describes Kinger to a T. Just cue a montage of him jumping or getting scared by things he didn't expect.
Oh, Jax!
And all of that is without mentioning that some of Kinger's thoughts are literally finished by Mildenhall on these tapes.
That wasn't so bad.
Which is what I would be saying if I didn't know that the creature was actually one of God's angels.
There is no doubt a connection between these two characters. Secondly, the way Kinger reacts to a lot of the situations here in this haunted house is really suspect. Like he's either trying to remember his past or desperately trying not to. For example, when he first hears the Baron's backstory, it seems to jog something in Kinger's memory, but he can't quite grasp it.
You know, I'm starting to think...
Then, when the lights fully go out and Kinger's able to remember more clearly, what's the first thing he does?
What happened?
I just remembered a really funny joke.
Why did you scream then?
Maybe it wasn't actually that funny.
He instantly remembers something that makes him scream, tries to play it off like it was a joke, but then concedes that maybe it wasn't actually that funny. Was he remembering something horrific from his past? Like something similar to Mildenhall? Finally, the cinematography of this episode really makes a point to drive a parallel between Mildenhall and Kinger, like just from the way the camera decides to linger on characters and when it does so. Take a look at this sequence.
I took it upon myself to spend every waking moment, doing all I could to protect my family from the creature, hoping that when I'd eventually killed it, I would be freed from this awful feeling.
It cuts to Kinger the second it talks about protecting his family. Likewise, here when describing the creature that Mildenhall was obsessed with, the camera distinctly cuts back and forth between the angel and Kinger.
Not quite a man, but not quite an animal.
It's going out of its way to create this connection. So, okay, if Kinger is basically Mildenhall, and Mildenhall is being haunted by this angel, what's haunting Kinger? What's driven him down this spiral? Well, just like Mildenhall, I believe that Kinger is the reason that his wife died. Again, the cinematography really drives this home.
I ended up shooting the love of my life, mistaking her for the creature.
The shot immediately shifts to Kinger when it talks about shooting the love of his life. And what's more, we know that Kinger has already mistaken the angel for his wife.
You look beautiful, honey.
So it's not a stretch to think that, just like Mildenhall hunted and harmed this creature and was banished to hell for it, all while his family fell apart, so was Kinger. But perhaps the best bit of evidence for this, when Pomni and Kinger are dragged down to hell and Pomni is possessed by evil spirits, what do they say?
How's your wife, Kinger?
They're taunting Kinger with this. He's the reason his wife got hurt, the reason she quote-unquote died. Even if these characters are not exactly the same, their stories are not completely identical beat for beat, there are clearly parallels. There was a reason Kinger was on this adventure and not like Gangle or Ragatha or Jax. But how? Why? What is the purpose of all of these parallels with Kinger? What is this trying to tell us about him and his past beyond the metaphor? Well, it's tragic, but I believe that Kinger may have gotten his wife to join the circus. Maybe it was to save her from some sickness or some disease or some tragic accident, to copy her brain into this computer so it could live on. But either way, it backfired on Kinger big time. And like, it's not that this just fits with Mildenhall's story.
In my attempts to protect her, I ended up becoming the monster myself.
But it also fits with what little we know to be 100% true about Kinger's origins. See, in a previous theory, we speculated that Kinger used to be a QA developer or bug tester for CNA, the company that made the Digital Circus. But as we've gotten more information, I don't think that that's the case anymore. All of the flags that we noticed about bugs and insects were actually pointing to his wife's interests, but that doesn't mean that Kinger didn't work for CNA. And I actually believe he was a higher up at the company for a few reasons. Firstly, I explained earlier that I believe Kinger was a wealthy person before joining the circus. That would make sense if he was some sort of big shot at a tech company like CNA. But in this episode, we also got this tidbit.
7 years of computer science for this, huh?
I don't know about you, but that really stuck out to me, and we know for a fact that this 7-year time frame is important. See, over on the Digital Circus subreddit, user Nerd the Scourge noticed that this timeline wasn't consistent in all of the dubs of the show. In English, German, and Vietnamese, Kinger says 7 years, but in most other languages like Spanish, Japanese, and French, he says 4 years. That's the time frame you'd expect to get a bachelor's degree at university, so that makes sense for being in computer science, right? But here's the thing. In the comments of this thread, one of the actual translators that worked with Glitch for the German dub left a comment. User I Am Proud of Reddit explained that the script that they were working with originally said 4 years, but was changed to 7 years shortly before release. They assumed that most of the other dubs just didn't have time to record the new line, thus the discrepancy between the languages. But more importantly for us here, Gooseworks and Glitch originally had one timeline in mind, but made a point to go back and change it. They thought that this 7-year time frame was so important that they had to go and make a last-minute change. Assuming that this is how long Kinger studied computer science in college? That's a long time to be going to school. Like, that's how long you would be studying if you were getting a doctorate degree, as in Kinger would be a doctor of computer science. Dr. Kinger. That would make him an attractive candidate at companies like Google or Microsoft, or say a developer like CNA, almost certainly in a high position. What's more, we can also piece together a rough timeline here. In a previous theory, we speculated that the Amazing Digital Circus was straight up set in the 90s due to all of the ancient-looking computer hardware, but that's probably not the case. In this episode, we see a grave outside of Mildenhall Manor that reads R.I.P. Peggy 2019 to 2022. So while this may be a game from the 90s, clearly time has continued on, and this story is almost certainly set in the early 2020s. According to Gooseworks, we know that Kinger is 48 years old. If we assume the series is set in about 2020, that Kinger went to college when he was 18 and spent 7 years studying there, that would mean he would have graduated in the late 90s, the perfect time to join or found a game developer like CNA in the late 90s. Kinger knew about the circus before joining the circus. He knew what he was getting himself and his wife into, but perhaps he didn't understand the torture they'd be under, the constant torment and insanity they'd be forced into, the abstraction that awaits them at the end. If he wanted to save his wife, like we speculated here today, then that would just add on to the guilt. He didn't end up saving her, he ended up killing her, just like Mildenhall and his wife. So that's Kinger's tragic backstory, but what does this tell us about what comes next? Well, after this episode, I think it's clear that Kinger is going to abstract, and it's going to be soon. First of all, he has death flags up the wazoo, like indications that he's going to be on the chopping block. I mean, how many characters have suggested that he's basically on the cusp of abstraction and that they're surprised that he hasn't yet?
I mean, no offense, Kinger, but I always thought you would be next.
Thank you.
And drawing parallels with more of Mildenhall's quotes, he says,
If nothing else, I will slay the beast that took everything from me.
Is this talking about Kinger? Will he allow himself to abstract and join his wife in the cellar? And if all of that doesn't convince you, if you think all of that is a long shot, well, Glitch might have revealed his fate right under all of our noses. In a previous theory, we noticed that Glitch tells us a lot about their characters' personalities, who they consider important, and also potentially the future of their characters through the merchandise they sell of them. So, the fact that Jax's pin was the only one where the pin back was torn to show the void behind him told us that he's likely going to have more than meets the eye. And, well, Reddit user the Red J Cat Mama on our subreddit noticed that Glitch is now selling a pair of matching socks. They're stylized to look like abstracted monsters, but one of the sets is lined with red and the other with purple. Queenie's cloak was red, and what color is Kinger's cloak? Purple. By the end of things, just like these socks, Kinger and Queenie are going to match again as abstracted entities. But the thing that really cemented this for me, Kinger's character arc is coming to a close. See, something else that really stood out to me in this episode was this quote from Mildenhall.
My paranoia had driven me to the point where I was no longer the protector my wife and theoretical children needed.
Fun fact, we actually get a glimpse of this family here in the episode, kind of hidden in the darkness if you brighten up the image. But regardless, theoretical children is an interesting phrase, right? Like, it could mean something like a future child, one that hasn't been born yet. Or it could mean an adopted child. And tell me, who is Kinger very protective of in this episode, both emotionally and physically? Pomni. He physically protects her from the angel in this scenario that she's clearly terrified of.
Stay behind me. Just leave it to me. I can handle this.
But he's also treating her with kindness, trying to help her process this awful situation she's in. Like, just listen to this.
Sometimes it all just feels pointless, but it's not. Not if you have people who care about you. Cherish the people around you. You never know when they'll be gone.
That right there, that's Kinger doing his best, intentionally or no, to prepare Pomni for what's to come. Teaching her that even if someone's dead, that they're gone, while that's sad, it's going to be okay. And if you die, if you're the person who's dead and gone, as long as you made a positive impact, even just on one person, then you've done what you've needed to.
Don't worry about me. As long as you remember, things will be okay.
And finally, what does Kinger do here to help Pomni out of this horror show, out of this literal afterlife like hell? He holds her hand and guides her through it.
You're very strong, Pomni, and I know you'll be able to get through this. Just hold on to me. We'll get through it together.
He even glows like some sort of guardian angel transcending to the next life. Glitch could not be more clear about this if they tried. Kinger is going to abstract and soon, and he's going to join his wife in the afterlife of the cellar. They'll be together once again, and even though it will be sad to lose Kinger, it'll be okay, because as long as Pomni and the rest remember him, he'll never really be gone. The Amazing Digital Circus is breaking Kane's brain. Throughout the Amazing Digital Circus, Kane has problems with his memory. He'll bring up conversations late.
Adzooks, you're right, Jack!
I said that like 5 minutes ago.
Forgets his own adventures.
Now what the heck happened around here? Oh yeah, my doing.
And in episode 3, this comes to a head when he can't remember why Zubul is upset.
Then what is your problem, Zubul? I'm trying my best to remember, but both you and my brain won't tell me.
In our latest theory, we tried to connect memory to concepts like light and darkness in history and myth, but there might be a more scientific answer. See, Zubul constantly tells Kane to
forget it.
If you're talking to a modern AI like ChatGPT and you tell it to forget it, well, it will literally forget what you're talking about. And this is exactly what we see with Kane.
Forget it? Forget what?
Forget what? Wait, what was I talking about? Oh yeah! It's been just about a year since we've covered the Amazing Digital Circus, and that hasn't been because there's a lack of things to talk about. If you don't know, the Amazing Digital Circus is the smash hit success from Glitch Productions created by the talented Gooseworks. We did several theories about it over the years, but 3 new episodes have dropped since our last theory. All of them great, by the way. But we haven't done another theory yet because doing them is a little bit intimidating. This show and the artists who work on it are full of creative energy. They've thrown out so many ideas that felt like great hooks for theories, so naturally, we grasped onto a lot of them. Admittedly, a lot of the theories we made are a bit out there. I mean, Pomni is an evil AI, and the Digital Circus is literally hell? Well, given the current state of AI, maybe that's not too far from being realistic. But the point is that we took a lot of big swings when talking about the Amazing Digital Circus. And as you'd expect, with a lot of big swings, some of those were big misses, and oh boy, did the comments sure let us know that. If there's one thing I've learned over the past couple of years with this show, it's that the fan base of the Amazing Digital Circus is incredibly passionate and incredibly protective of these characters. And you know what? I respect that a lot. I get it. The vibe and tone of the Digital Circus captured a lot of what I'm sure an entire generation has felt over the past 5 years in a way that I haven't seen in like a decade. That is worth feeling protective of. But this is a community and a series that I really do miss. I loved talking about it and I want to make more theories about it. But at the same time, I want to level set. I want to rethink how and why we approach this series and how we theorize about it. So here's what I want to do today, loyal theorists. I want to go back and look at all of our theories about the Amazing Digital Circus, go through them and look at them with the additional information we've gotten over the past 3 episodes and see if any of them actually hold up. Spoiler alert, I think a couple of them were really really, really solid. And a lot of them, didn't pan out. That is a charitable way to put it. We'll also catch ourselves up on the big revelations the show has given us and see if we can figure out the direction the series is headed using all of this new information. And hey, maybe, just maybe, we'll figure out the best way to make new theories about this show. Sound good? Well, I hope so. Put your ideas in the suggestion box, loyal theorists, as we dive into this new adventure with the Amazing Digital Circus. So just real quick, our first few theories about this series actually came out back when Matt was hosting the show, so don't get whiplash if you hear his voice while I pull quotes from them. Also, a lot of them were made when we basically had zero knowledge of the show beyond episode 1, so I'm probably going to be blasting through a few of them pretty quickly just to save time and help our editors out. I mean, I can tell by the script link that this video is already very long. Alright, so what's up first?
Everything in the show is literally a video game set in the late 1990s.
Yeah, this one's pretty self-explanatory and also pretty thoroughly debunked. Not only do the characters talk about technology and use slang from the modern age,
and posting videos of it online.
Ah, a YouTuber. It's kinda cringe.
but there's also a gravestone in episode 3 reading R.I.P. Peggy 2019 to 2022. So yeah, there you go. Maybe the Digital Circus was made in the 90s itself, but the series is more or less set in the modern day. Alright, so which theory is up next?
Pomni helped create this hell simulation that they're currently stuck in.
Yep, so the idea here was that Pomni was a programmer at CNA, the people we think created the Digital Circus. And our main bit of evidence came from how Pomni reacts to seeing the recreation of the computer and desk with the VR headset while she's running through the back rooms in episode 1. However, just like that first mini theory, this one is completely debunked. In episode 5, we get a great scene with everyone at a noir-themed bar, and we get a glimpse at a lot of their backstories, including Pomni's. Here, she explains,
I was an accountant for a supermarket chain.
And she ended up in the Digital Circus because
I sometimes got bored of things, and I would seek out mild thrills, like exploring abandoned buildings and posting videos of it online.
The implication here is that she broke into the office building, put on the headset, and got sucked into the circus, not that she helped make it. Like, it's a pretty open and shut case there, honestly. Also, this explains the little mental breakdown we see in the backroom section of the circus that Kane created. It wasn't her getting triggered by her workstation, but instead having that mental break recognizing the building she broke into and the headset she put on that got her trapped in this mess to begin with. Also, a little bit of a tangent, but I have to say, I loved this little scene at the noir bar, just letting the characters talk and learn about each other. Like, we'll be back here to talk about this again, I'm sure about it. Okay, so our third theory from back in the day.
All the characters aren't actually humans trapped inside the Digital Circus.
So the long and short of this, we believed that instead of the humans keeping the headsets on as their brains are being used by the circus, Sword Art Online style, they were instead copied and turned into their characters in the cast. Real talk, this one was a big swing, even back then, and there isn't a ton of hard evidence for it as the series has gone on. Really, the biggest piece of evidence, that we don't see any bodies attached to the headsets in the real world, could just be explained away with cartoon logic. Like, hey, they just got digitized and literally sucked into the computer like Tron or Digimon. Don't worry about it. Don't think too hard. The whole idea that they're just digital brain clones is an extra layer of complexity that, at this point, probably would not really make sense for this story since they haven't explored that at all yet. So yeah, sure, this theory could still be true, but there's no real reason for it. Alright, so last up in the era of Matt, we've got...
The Amazing Digital Circus is, quite literally, hell.
Yeah, okay, that sentence is still very funny, and this episode was incredible theorist out of context fodder. Now, to be clear, this one was always out there, and we knew it. It was more of a fun side thought based on a bunch of parallels with Christian mythology that we noticed. I mean, we even say as much in that actual episode if you go back and watch it. The evidence we pulled was mostly symbolic. Pomni wears the same colors that many depictions of Jesus do, the characters are deliberately arranged similar to the famous Last Supper painting at the end of episode 1. The themes of the show are very similar to a play called No Exit, where hell was being trapped with other people that you couldn't stand. You know, that sort of stuff. And I believe that thematically, this theory is still pretty solid. Like, obviously, the circus isn't literally an embodiment of the Christian hell, but the parallels are clear and metaphorically, it very much is. And this crazy idea was later validated, even if just a little, by episode 3 of the series. The one where Pomni and Kinger go to a version of hell during an adventure and fight a biblically accurate angel. So yeah, fun idea, thematically on point, but not super serious or relevant to the future of the show. Oh, and a little bit of an aside here, because there's not really a better place to mention this in the rest of the episode, but perhaps the best bit of new evidence for this part of the whole theory? Well, we connected Koen and the company that created the digital circus, CNA, to the biblical figures Cain and Abel. And in the latest episode, there's an interesting moment where Koen pulls out some pictures of the CNA office and just looks at them. It's a bit difficult to read his exact emotions here because, you know, he's a set of teeth and a pair of eyeballs, but there is some sort of recognition, which, hey, makes sense because he would need to know about these offices to create the backrooms from episode 1. At the very least, we can confidently say that this particular connection between Koen and CNA is a thread that this series will continue pulling. Okay, so that's one of our more silly theories down, but what about something a bit more serious? What's next? One of these characters in the Amazing Digital Circus is an AI imposter. Okay, alright. Next up is our theory that one of the quote-unquote human characters is actually an evil AI that's infiltrated the cast to torture them, and the most likely suspect, Jax. Now, I believed this was the case for many reasons, most of which I thought were understandable at the time. First off, it was heavily implied that an NPC had come into the circus at some point.
I know you guys love your NPCs, but if I start losing track of who's a human and who's an NPC, who knows what could happen?
And a lot of time in the episodes were spent saying either just how good the AI in the circus has gotten,
I'm testing out a new AI in this one! It should be 57 times more immersive!
or showing just how human a lot of the AI characters like Gummy Goo could act when given the chance.
Doesn't matter in the slightest. I'm nothing. My life, my memories, my friends, it's all fake.
Seriously, this show was just dripping with the theme that the human characters and the AI aren't actually all that different. And what better way to build on that than with the twist that one of them is an AI. Jax made the most sense to me. He was antagonistic, excited to go on the adventure so that he could torture his fellow castmates, ignored the laws of physics in ways that the other characters didn't really seem to, was the only main human character interested in food, something only NPCs were interested in up until that point, and was the only character in the cast outside of NPCs like Koen and Bubble that could break the fourth wall and look or talk directly to the audience. At the time, combined with all of those thematic parallels, I really thought that this one made sense and was going to pan out. But, well, it's very clearly not the case now that we have more episodes. Most of those quirks turned out to be just that, quirks. He likes food just because it's something to do and enjoy in this digital world. Being mean to the others is straight up a character flaw he's taken on himself because he feels like it's his archetype.
We're still people, though, right?
I thought we were at first, but as time goes on, we just end up falling into our archetypes, become part of the machine.
What's your archetype, then? The villain?
Man, Pastely would have pointed at this line and screamed. See, he's part of the machine. He's basically admitting he's an AI. But Present enlightenedly sees this for what it is. A human character who's been beaten down so much, he doesn't see a point in fighting against the machine that's assimilating him. Okay, so what about the defying physics then? Well, mostly, that was just for the lulz. And it's not something I think the other characters couldn't do if they really wanted to. See, one of the moments that really stood out to me in this latest episode was this right here. After getting hurt before the in-house gun adventure, Ragatha starts out with one fewer life than everyone else. But Kinger has a solution.
Oh, I got just the thing. Here, take this.
Wait, what did you just do?
It's a butterfly. It can restore your health.
Did Koen mention that?
Oh, nah, I made it up.
Yeah, Kinger straight up made up a new rule in the circus and restored health in one of the games. To me, this isn't saying that Kinger is special or anything like that. This is telling me that the cast have way more control here than they probably think they do. Something also supported in the previous episode when they could vote on changing the other castmates, like turning Jax into a vegan.
I'm calling a vote. Let's skip this one and also make Jax a vegan for the rest of the day.
You can't do that.
So all of the physics-defying stuff Jax was doing, it was literally just because he wanted to. Just like the butterfly restoring health, and other smaller things, like Jax and Pomni shooting the guns all cool like just because they can. But more than any of this, the thing that really disproves Jax is an AI, Jax clearly has a human backstory because it seems like he was brought into the circus with a friend, or at the very least became good friends with another character before the start of the series. This character was likely named Ribbit, as we learned from a Tumblr post from Gooseworks, and he abstracted just before Kaufmo. We see Jax look at Ribbit's door, sadly, and he becomes upset when anything regarding the character is mentioned, which, hey, understandable if your best friend basically died right in front of you and there was nothing you could do about it. This is why he's so detached from the others, why he didn't attend Kaufmo's funeral, why he's embraced being the antagonistic funny guy. He just doesn't want to feel this pain again, because if he does, well, we see at the end of the last episode, he almost abstracts and only barely pulls himself back, a storyline I expect we'll be coming back to in future episodes. Ironically, this kind of makes Jax the most human character of them all, doesn't it? But that theory wasn't alone, it was part of a pair. So, up next... Is Pomni from the Amazing Digital Circus an AI imposter? Ah, yes, of course, one of my more infamous theories here. Pomni is actually an evil AI. But hey, like this one, yeah, they were totally going down this route, dude.
Today, I'm just gonna be evil. Those other fools better watch their tails because they're going to face the wrath of Pomni the Evil!
See, that's why she has the evil arc in one of these episodes. I'm not crazy, you're crazy. Okay, no, but for real, this idea was a stretch even back when we made it. I mean, we even said as much in the episode. A big component of this theory was about looking at the science of artificial intelligence, how it works, and then applying that knowledge to the Amazing Digital Circus to see if anything fit. There were some cases where they kinda did if you squinted a little bit, and combined with the idea from the previous theory that someone was likely an AI, that was the backbone of this one. But yeah, nah, this is absolutely not the direction the series went. Outside of looking at the technology of AI, probably the biggest evidence I saw for this was just how much we saw Pomni empathizing with NPC characters like Gummy Goo. Again, I saw this as Glitch setting up the idea that the AI and humans aren't so different, with Pomni directly as the bridge between the two, but that's just not the case. I feel very confident that Pomni is exactly who she appears to be, a very normal human with the very normal human backstory we've heard in the newer episodes. All of that empathy she was showing Gummy Goo, it was just Pomni being empathetic and setting up those tools of empathy to be used with other characters like Kinger, Ragatha, and Jax later in the show. This is a situation where I really just have to use Occam's razor. This is a philosophical and problem-solving tool that states that the simplest answer is most often the most likely answer. So, is Pomni an evil AI? No, she's just an empathetic person. Though I do have to say, it feels like the show is really rubbing both the Jax is an AI and Pomni is an AI theory in my face with this scene in particular.
Daisy, Daisy, give me your answer.
Are you seriously gonna start singing that?
If you don't know, this is a song called Daisy Bell, and it's significant because it was actually the first song that was ever reproduced digitally. Yeah, back in 1961, IBM programmed one of their computers to sing it, demonstrating early speech synthesis.
Daisy, Daisy, give me your answer, ooh.
And the song was later included as part of the computer character HAL 9000 in 2001: A Space Odyssey.
Daisy, Daisy, give me your answer, do.
So like, come on, man. This is clearly just a fun little Easter egg, but dude, Castley would have eaten that up as part of those old theories. All right, so cool. That theory is behind us. What's next?
I need a living host in order to escape the Hall of the Damned, and your bodies will be my only means of doing so.
This is the key to the entire future of this series. Yeah, it's our theory that the Amazing Digital Circus is actually out to steal your soul. So this one is a bit complicated, but the TLDW, I was trying to piece together what happens to cast members after they abstract, and using the adventures that Kane was coming up with as a sort of rubric for the overall plans of the AI in the circus. Basically, the circus was dehumanizing the human characters, and when they eventually abstract from that loss of humanity, I thought the raw computing power of their brains was being added to the circus's AI. And the why it was doing this? Well, it was in an attempt to escape its computery prison body. This was represented by the storyline that Pomni and Kinger follow in the spooky haunted house adventure Kane makes, with a dark spirit trying to escape from its hellish prison. Looking back, I actually think that a lot of the pieces we put together here do make a lot of sense given the knowledge of the series we had at the time. time, so go check out that theory if you want the full context. But that being said, with these 3 additional episodes, that just doesn't seem to be the direction that the Amazing Digital Circus is headed. Like, if this was indeed the long-term storyline of the series, we would have seen way more buildup of this idea, but all we've gotten instead was acknowledgement that Kane knows about stuff in the outside world. There really just haven't been any more hidden messages about a deeper AI entity, or any more exploration of abstraction, and whether or not that influences the circus. And if that was the long-term play, we absolutely would have gotten more of it by now. But instead, we're 2/3 of the way through this thing, and that's basically all we've gotten. Instead, this show is way more interested in exploring its individual characters and their dynamics, which, hey, leads us to the next theory.
Kinger is going to be a tragic character with a tragic end.
Yep, it's our little character study about Kinger's backstory and his eventual fate in the show. If you missed this one, I believed that Kinger was some sort of bigwig at CNA with a past that he'd rather forget, and that past was likely getting his wife involved with the digital circus, which would eventually lead to her death through abstraction. This was based off of his appearance, his similarities to the character Theodore Mildenhall in one of the adventures, his competence with guns, and how other characters prod about the loss of his wife. We also speculated that he'd be the next character to abstract thanks to, and I kid you not, socks. Yeah, there are a pair of abstraction-themed socks on the Glitch store that use Kinger and Queenie's color scheme, so it just made sense. So overall, I'm still really proud of this theory. I think it's really solid stuff, even if some of the smaller details might be off or need to change thanks to new information we've gotten since episode 3. Like, merch might not necessarily be the indicator of what Glitch plans to do with these characters like I thought at the time. I mean, they're selling plushies of Pomni dressed up as Jax and Pomni as a hamster, stuff that is more symbolic or clearly non-canon, but just totally cute. And given that Jax seems to be on the brink of abstraction himself, well, Kinger might not be next on the chopping block, but I can still definitely see a future where this is the eventual fate for our lovable little chess piece. Now, looking back at all of these theories, what's panned out and what hasn't, it's got me thinking about how we can possibly move forward theorizing about this show. And I do have an idea. It mostly comes from something Gooseworks said recently about the series during a live stream, and specifically it was about what she expects the reaction to the next episode to be. Check it.
I'm really excited for the reaction to that one.
It's gonna piss off.
It's gonna make people mad.
Type of fan.
It's only gonna piss off the right people.
Okay, so right off the bat, this could mean a lot of things. The people who could get mad at this upcoming episode could come from a wide gamut. Like, will it be Jax fans getting angry? There have been several camps of Jax stans that have swung back and forth at being angry and elated at the direction his character has gone. Or heck, maybe it could be people upset that he's gonna abstract. Or the people getting mad could be shippers, people who want Jax and Pomni to get together, or any other combination of characters. But another option I think is worth exploring here, well, what if the people who are going to get mad are theorists? Don't get me wrong, I don't think Gooseworks, or anyone else at Glitch for that matter, are making their shows with like me in mind, with these channels in mind. That's ridiculous, and I actually know for a fact that a lot of them avoid theory videos from creators here on YouTube so it doesn't influence their writing. And I don't want to come across as thinking that these creators are talking about literally us here in these actual clips. That's not my intention. No, but I think even if that isn't what they meant, theorists could have the same reaction to the next few episodes as what they've described here. Really, the big takeaway I've had after sitting and thinking about this series over the past year, seeing new episodes drop and all of the commentary from Gooseworks and the other creators, is I don't think there is going to be a big theory twist. There is no secret AI or hidden story. The Amazing Digital Circus is exactly what it says on the tin. It's a character-driven series dissecting its cast, their relationships with one another, and the drama that follows, all while they're tortured by their AI overlord Kane, which means that they're getting to know each other better, revealing things about their backstories that they clearly haven't before, and are growing as people because of it. Now, don't get me wrong, I don't blame us online theorists for really jumping on this series. There were certainly a lot of seeds planted early on, and hell, even in recent episodes, that could grow into some crazy twist or unforeseen storyline that maybe, just maybe, you could suss out by putting the pieces together. But so far, the Amazing Digital Circus hasn't really seemed interested in following up on any of that. Well, at least the ones that aren't focused on character moments like Kinger's backstory. But the big stuff, like the hints that we picked up that one of the main cast is actually an evil AI toying with the humans, or that there's an evil AI buried deep in the circus that wants to escape. Those just aren't threads they've pulled on, nor do I expect them to as the series goes forward. Like, at this point, it would be a really big turn into left field and probably make things worse for the overall story. And you know what? Good. That's a great thing. I mean, don't misunderstand. I love a good theory-driven show. I mean, just look at what channel you're on. But also, there comes a point in your life when you realize that not everything is a FNAF or a Gravity Falls. Not everything needs to have a secret story hidden beneath layers and layers of lore and puzzle solving. Sometimes it really is just that simple. And honestly, that's a breath of fresh air. Like, I thought going in that the Amazing Digital Circus was gonna be like Lost, with a bunch of mysteries to solve and theories driving the online conversation, but instead, we just got a good TV show. In retrospect, I think what I should have done with this series was really dig more into the characters. And I don't mean by trying to figure out, like, who's the evil AI spy or anything like that. I mean, trying to figure out their backstories or what issues they're dealing with. Just really do character studies on them, similar to what we did with Kinger last year, to see if we could figure out what the creators of the Digital Circus are saying with each of their cast members instead of trying to make sense out of what they weren't saying. You saw our latest video where I talked about all of our previous Digital Circus theories, what we got right and what we got wrong. You'll know that I want to do something a little different involving this show moving forward. Instead of taking the traditional theorist approach by making big swings about how this changes everything, or taking small breadcrumbs and trying to figure out what big conspiracy is actually going on in the background of this show, I want to spotlight what this show does better than maybe anything else. It's characters. In an older theory, we did this with Kinger, explaining how this ultimate gag character was potentially dealing with a lot of internalized guilt for bringing his wife into the Digital Circus, which ended up with her abstracted, and that he may soon join her in that fate. I still think that this is one of the stronger episodes we've done about this series, so today I wanted to do the same with two more characters that might seem like they started out as jokey or one note, but when you take a deeper look at them, behind the mask and the removable toy parts, this pair might be two of the most human characters in the entire show. And by analyzing their struggles and how they've dealt with them so far, we may get a small glimpse into what's going to happen next in the Amazing Digital Circus. This one's going to be fun and different, loyal theorists, so please turn your attention to the center of the ring as we get right into it. So, I wonder which of these two threads we should pull on first. Oh geez, my bad, Gangle. But hey, since you're here, we might as well start with you. Gangle. As I mentioned at the top of the episode, there wasn't really a ton to say about Gangle when the series first started. As Jax put it,
Gangle's the sad one.
Gangle's whole personality was tied to her masks, pardon the ribbon pun. When she wears her happy mask, she's timid, but, well, happy. But in every episode, when that happy mask inevitably breaks, usually at the hands of Jax, Gangle is forced to wear her sad mask, which, well, makes her sad. Simple enough, right? Now, if you've ever been to or been involved with the theater before, Gangle's masks should be familiar. These are what are known as the comedy and tragedy masks, and in modern times, they're more or less a cliche symbol that represents the idea of the theater as a whole. But what you may not realize is just how far back the association between these masks and theater goes, because man, it goes way back to like ancient times. Ancient Greece is often considered the birthplace of modern theater as we know it. Going to the theater was a big part of Greek life at the time, so much so that they constructed these humongous venues, some of which are still around to this day. The problem was, if you got stuck in the nosebleeds, it was pretty hard to make out the characters on stage, let alone read their emotions. So to combat this, actors would often don these large masks with overly exaggerated facial features that made it crystal clear to everyone, even the chumps in the cheap seats, exactly what each character was feeling. And hey, that's sort of true for Gangle too, isn't it? They're literally wearing their heart on their sleeve, or their face, I guess? Whichever personality Gangle is embodying at any moment is shown or determined by the mask she wears. Which made things all the more interesting when Gangle was given this new mask in episode 4. A new mask meant a new mood, but this one was, well, let's just say it was a little bit different.
Next you're gonna say my authority isn't real.
Yeah, not exactly the Gangle we've come to know and love.
Well, maybe you just need some more...
more...
But it was one line in particular that really set off my theorist deep fryer.
Why would you do this?
It's called a manic episode, and you're getting 3 more seasons.
Well, I don't know about 3 more seasons. Gooseworks seems pretty adamant that there are only going to be 3 more episodes. Regardless, you catch what Gangle said there, though? She said that she was having a manic episode. Now, those of you who have dealt with mental health or seen our video about the Inside Out analog horror may know where I'm going to go with this, but for those of you who didn't or don't, well, that term, manic episode, or just mania in general, is associated with a very real, very serious mental health condition, bipolar disorder. So it's here where I want to say that we're about to dive into some pretty deep topics, and our option was to either bring light to some of these important issues or to not cover them at all. Honestly, with how the Digital Circus treats its characters with respect and how important these themes are to the show, it would have felt wrong not to include this. I talked a lot with our team about their own personal experiences, and we even discussed getting some professionals on like Cinematherapy to help explain these topics. Maybe we'll do that in the future, but right now, just a heads up that this is what we're doing. And please feel free to leave a comment to share your experiences, or if you have a different interpretation here. I just want to start a conversation. Now, this is very simplified, but bipolar is a mood disorder characterized by extreme mood swings. Patients will have prolonged periods of heightened, almost euphoric feelings, commonly known as manic or hypomanic episodes. During these, people with bipolar may have racing thoughts, make poor or reckless decisions, or even forego sleep. But other symptoms can include feeling a distorted sense of well-being, being unusually talkative or talking fast, or being more energetic and agitated than usual, many of which we see Gangle show during this fast food episode. But on the other side of the coin, this period of mania is often followed up by stretches where those highs turn to lows, known as major depressive episodes, symptoms of which can include feeling sad, hopeless, or tearful, which we definitely see Gangle go through throughout the series. Major depressive episodes can also include feelings of extreme guilt, where it's probably not necessary, which we also see Gangle deal with. In episode 6, while all of the characters are running around the circus playing a shooting game, instead of focusing on, that, Gangle finds herself preoccupied with guilt and worry about how Jax will react to her declining to be on his team.
Do you think Jax is gonna be mad that I didn't team up with him?
Now, to be crystal clear, I'm not an expert. I am not a therapist or a psychiatrist, so I don't want to stand here and try to officially diagnose Gangle with bipolar disorder. But she is showing a lot of the symptoms, and they are clearly having a pretty serious effect on her mental state. For example, at the end of episode 4, after she's ditched her manic mask and the gang returns to the Digital Circus, Gangle isolates herself from the rest of the group. Why? Because she believes that everyone's going to hate her forever for how she acted during the adventure, even though that isn't true. And throughout the show, Gangle struggles to stick up for herself, especially when it comes to Jax. And in the latest episode, Gangle lays out exactly how she feels about her mask and her gimmick, and, well, just listen.
How are you supposed to like the part of yourself that just makes you worse than everyone else?
Man, jeez, that really just hits close to home, doesn't it? Just speaking from personal experience, these aren't the sorts of issues I imagine someone facing just in the Digital Circus here. That's a pretty internalized feeling that probably stretches pretty far back for Gangle, and we have gotten several hints of that throughout the show. Like, in the most recent episodes, we've gotten a lot more insight into all of the characters and their backstories, and Gangle is no exception. Though it was pretty clear throughout the series that Gangle likes to draw, in episode 5 we learned that she straight up tried to pursue a career in art, but it didn't exactly go to plan.
I was in community college for graphic design, but I dropped out. I didn't really pursue art much after that.
Yep, that is too real. She'd then go on to become a shift manager at a fast food restaurant, thus the plot of the fast food episode, before eventually stumbling her way into the Digital Circus. Now, we don't know for sure why Gangle dropped out of school. Like, it's possible that she just wasn't skilled enough to make it, but honestly, I feel like it's far more likely that something else got in the way of that passion. Check out this small interaction when the gang are in Gangle's adventure suggestion of a slice-of-life school anime.
There's nothing wrong with your suggestion.
How did you know this was my suggestion?
See how Gangle is trying to desperately cover up her drawings and deflect the suggestion that this was even her idea? She's embarrassed by her own interests when she really shouldn't be. And given how she interacts with Jax and his bullying, there could have been a similar figure or teacher in her art classes in college that really just put her down. But to be fair, that is a bit speculative. The far more likely answer for who got in the way of Gangle's pursuit of her dreams is Gangle. Whether it was bipolar disorder, depression, a complete lack of self-confidence, or something else, something caused her to kill those dreams and instead fall into the world of fast food. Oh, and just because I wanted to include this and didn't really have a better place, according to Gooseworks, Gangle is supposed to be 26 years old, and given the timeline of the show we figured out, that would mean that she grew up through stuff like the 2008 financial crisis and the pandemic. That could have easily compounded all of these issues of isolation Gangle is feeling and just made them worse. It's a small thing, and I know most of us felt like our lives got completely upended by both of those events, but I wanted to mention it because the timeline was just too perfect not to. Which also brings me to another small moment involving Gangle that seems like a throwaway gag at first, but after rewatching the series again for this theory, I'm not so sure. See, there's a scene in episode 5 where the gang are forced to play a game of softball against evil versions of themselves. Here, each of the main cast get an evil doppelganger. Well, except for Gangle.
Why don't I get an evil clone?
No, but for real, that is a very good question. Why didn't Gangle get an evil version of herself? I mean, Jax got an evil clone that was just nice, and even Orbsman got an evil clone. Freaking Orbsman! Where is evil Gangle? Well, beyond this being a funny gag, it did make me wonder, what if we've already seen evil Gangle? I mean, in episode 4, when Gangle puts on the manic mask, she becomes the opposite of the kind-hearted ribbon girl we've come to know and love. She gets in Pomni's face and yells at her, tattles on Jax to Kane, and even forces him to watch one of her VHS instructional tapes against his will. And if you take a peek into the video description for that fast food episode on YouTube, it reads in part, quote, Gangle is the manager and has a brand new mask. It's like she's a brand new person. A new person, huh? An evil version of herself, one could say? Now, to be clear, I am not trying to say that Gangle is literally turning into a new character here, and I'm not trying to say that someone going through a serious mental health crisis is in any way becoming evil. Like, far from it. In fact, I feel like this is a pretty common, pretty human thing to feel. Like, I don't know about you, but some days I wake up and I just don't feel right. I don't feel like myself. It feels like the person getting out of bed is like the evil clone of me. Look, the point I'm trying to make here is that Gangle isn't just some tee-hee, look at the funny, sad character. Like, she's not Eeyore. Just like everyone else in the digital circus, she's a very real person dealing with some very real emotions. Something that a real therapist or psychiatrist could probably help her out with. But definitely not Kane. That would just make things worse. At the very least, though, Gangle could use a friend, and thankfully, she does have someone who's willing to listen to her. I'm of course talking about the foul-mouthed mix-and-match toy that is Zooble. So, much like Gangle, when the Amazing Digital Circus began, Zooble felt pretty one-note. In the first 2 episodes, they had, what, like 3 lines? And like most of that was literally them just swearing. Honestly, go off, my liege. Once the adventure started in those episodes, Zooble would Zooble off, middle fingers in tow, playing the grouchy archetype. But even as early as episode 2, we could tell that there was more to Zooble than meets the mismatched eyes. While everyone else was slowly destabilizing the Candy Canyon Kingdom, Zooble spent that time setting up for Kaufmo's funeral, letting the group say goodbye to their friend. Which, as a side note to me, is pretty fascinating because, according to Gooseworks, Zooble was the character who entered the circus just before Pomni. That means that they would have spent the least amount of time with Kaufmo before he abstracted. So them doing this really says a lot about Zooble in a great way, I have to say. Anyway, since then though, we've been given enough Zooble lore to fill a Zooble chest with. And in fact, in the noir bar scene in episode 5, we got hints at how Zooble ended up stuck in the digital circus in the first place. Here, Pomni explains what she did for fun in her previous life.
Well, I sometimes got bored of things, and I would seek out mild thrills, like exploring abandoned buildings, you know, and posting videos of it online.
We talked about this in our last video about the digital circus, but reading between the lines here, this is telling us that Pomni was an urban explorer, stumbled upon the abandoned CNA offices, put on the weird headset, and bam! Next thing you know, she's a jester in a retro video game, which is neat and all, but just listen listen to how Zubul responds to this.
I sometimes did that. I wouldn't record it, though.
They were also an urban explorer, and if I were to guess, they suffered literally the exact same fate as Pomni, exploring that CNA building and putting on that same headset. But outside of that speculation, we also get some concrete facts about Zubul's backstory, too. Prior to entering the circus, Zubul spent some time as a bartender and a tattoo artist, which is actually pretty impressive given the fact that Zubul is supposedly just 22 years old, and both of those jobs typically require you to be at least 18, sometimes older. Funnily enough, this history as a bartender also really fits the Zubul character arc because they very much give sage advice, similar to the bartender trope you see in just so much media. For example, that moment earlier with Gangle.
How are you supposed to like the part of yourself that just makes you worse than everyone else?
Yeah, Zubul was the other part of that interaction, giving some truly great advice about self-care. And this isn't just a one-off with Gangle.
And now I don't think anybody wants to talk to me anymore.
I still like talking to you. Look, the new mask was a bust. So what? I'm sure we'll find something that works eventually.
Man, Zubul's a great friend. But while they're more than willing to be a voice of reason and a good friend to others in the circus, it's safe to say that Zubul themselves is also dealing with some heavy personal struggles, but they're doing it alone. In episode 3, Zubul explains that they're refusing to go on adventures not because they're a jerk or lazy or anything like that, but instead because...
It's me, remember? I don't like myself. I hate this body. I hate all these stupid removable pieces. I just want to find something that feels good.
They feel uncomfortable in the body they've been given here in the circus, and despite the fact that Kane has provided Zubul with a near endless supply of parts to mix and match, nothing's felt right. In fact, we've mentioned this before, but if you pay attention, Zubul's been trying out new parts in each and every episode, but to no avail. This, along with the fact that Zubul uses any pronouns, means that it's not a crazy reveal to point out that Zubul is very much a representative for the transgender and non-binary communities. Now, I'm not part of those communities myself, and I want to stay in my lane, but everything I've researched and the people I've talked to explain very similar feelings. A lot of them deal with body dissatisfaction or body dysmorphia. Like they're not comfortable in the bodies they've been given and are trying to find something that fits them better. It's also worth pointing out that Gooseworks herself is a trans woman, and though I don't want to assume anything about her experiences, I think it's safe to assume that at least some of them have been woven into Zubul's writing here. I mean, Zubul's triangular head is even reminiscent of one of Gooseworks' avatars. The parallels make sense, which also means that these are feelings that Zubul is having to deal with on top of being part of a circus-themed nightmare. But unlike Gangle, who has someone like Zubul to help support them, Zubul is more or less struggling in silence. I mean, unless you count talking to Kane, which I don't, my guy forgets all of their conversations like immediately.
Forget it.
Just forget it.
Forget what?
So with all of that in mind, what can Zubul do here? I mean, other than opening up to the others? Well, if you go back to their conversations with Gangle, I couldn't help but notice just how much of it might be useful to Zubul themselves. I mean, just listen.
Look, the new mask was a bust. So what? I'm sure we'll find something that works eventually.
How are you supposed to like the part of yourself that just makes you worse than everyone else?
'Cause it exists. It's a part of you that's real. And the only you that you should care about is the real you. You have to choose to love yourself, even if it doesn't make sense. It's not natural, it's intentional.
I mean, come on. We'll keep trying to find something until it works. The only you should really care about is the real you. You have to choose to love yourself. And in that last clip, we literally see Zubul reflected in Gangle's mask. In terms of visual storytelling, that's absolute cinema. Though I should mention that some of the folks in these communities that I've talked to about this script and about Zubul had a slightly different take, one that I wanted to bring up here. And that's that this is advice that Zubul was giving, but couldn't actually take themselves. Their experience might be one that's more about coming to grips with who they are, to find their own self-acceptance while not conforming to what everyone else says is right or normal. After all, and I cannot stress this enough, being trans or non-binary isn't a mental illness. It's just a part of who you are. But are they ready to accept that? Because judging by the way Zubul reacts to Gangle's follow-up to this conversation,
Have you ever had to make that choice?
Huh?
I think the answer is no, not yet, at least. So the only question left to answer is, well, what happens next? So the last episode ended with a bit of a cliffhanger. Jax and Pomni, who had become closer over the past few episodes, had a bit of a tiff, resulting in Jax almost abstracting at the end of the episode. And so when this next episode kicks off, I imagine that Jax is likely going to go back to his favorite old punching bag to try to regain a sense of normalcy, and that's gonna be Gangle. This will almost certainly be a make or break moment for Gangle. When Jax inevitably starts being Jax, is Gangle going to put her foot down and make it stop, or will she continue twisting herself into knots to try to keep Jax happy? In our last theory, we pointed out that Gooseworks said that the next episode will make a certain type of fan very annoyed, and that could be the Jax stans who are happy with him being a jerk. I believe that Jax is gonna take things a step or two too far, and really get called out for it in a way that drives a wedge between the cast, and in the end, that might cause Jax to abstract. As for Zooble, well, at some point, they really are going to need to grapple with some of the serious questions hanging over their head. They'll need to have conversations with everyone else and allow them to be the shoulders to lean on for once. But judging by the reaction to Gangle's Uno reverse card, that's going to be much easier said than done. And who knows, maybe they're already on that right path. On the one hand, over the past few episodes, we've started to see Zooble really open up, even if just a tiny amount. They've expressed how they've been feeling lately, even if only to Kane. They've started to participate in the adventures, and even make suggestions on what sort of adventures they'd like to go on. Clearly, Zooble has become much more comfortable with saying exactly what they want, rather than just flipping the bird and walking away. Though I do have to wonder if there's a bit of a darker path that could be taken here with Zooble if they aren't able to confront those questions. During episode 6, Zooble asks Ragatha if she has any of the stupid sauce left over from the fast food episode, and at the very end of the episode, we see a quick shot of Zooble very much zooted out on the sauce. Could that be a hint of a storyline to come about trying to find escape in other ways? At this point, only Gooseworks knows. Hey gang, a new episode of the Amazing Digital Circus just dropped, so, you know, I wanted to hop back into that world again. But, well, we're taking a bit of a swing here. Not because I necessarily think that this theory is wrong or anything like that, but because this is coming out the very same weekend as a brand new episode of the show. Generally, it takes us 2 weeks to actually make one of these theories, one to research and write it, and one to edit it, so this video won't be addressing anything in episode 8 beyond what's in the trailer. But even then, well, episode 7 gave us a lot to talk about. See, doing theories about the Amazing Digital Circus has always been a strange experience for me. I mean, just look at one of our videos last year where I talk about how we were just wrong about the series. But recently, it's been even more challenging because of the events of episode 7. Yeah, in case you need a refresher, this episode has the cast meet up with a secret cast member who's been lurking in the background of several episodes. A mannequin named Abel. He claims that he's a human who was given an NPC's appearance and therefore has been overlooked by Kane, and that he's been able to sneak around in the background because of it. He explains that he and Kinger were the ones that invented the digital circus together at a company called C&A, and then leads the cast on a quest to escape the circus. And I mean, hey, that sounds great. That confirms some of our theories, right? However, at the end of the episode, Jax foils the plot and forces everyone to stay in the circus. But then Kane appears and explains that actually none of what we just watched was even real. There was no Abel. Kinger's past is still a mystery, and the escape was a lie. It was all just an adventure that Kane cooked up because he knew the cast wanted out of the circus, and this was his best shot to give them what they wanted.
You mean this was all...
An adventure! Yes! And one I've been cooking up for a good long while!
We'd previously speculated that theorists weren't going to be quote-unquote happy with episode 7 because it was going to be shutting down a lot of the things that the community was putting together about escaping the circus. And, well, we were right there. Heck, this episode even went out of its way to poke some good-hearted fun at the whole religious angle we pointed out when the show first aired and now forever lives on in Matt Pat out-of-context compilations. To be honest, I've been stuck thinking about this and how exactly to approach the show now. I mean, I really like the series and want to continue talking about it, but, you know, the Amazing Digital Circus really does seem to go out of its way to laugh in the face of videos that explain how one small detail reveals everything. What do you do to work with that as a theorist? And, well, the more I've thought about it, the more I've dug deep to figure this show out, the more I realized that we are just as trapped as the cast here in the Amazing Digital Circus. Me, you, every theorist out there, we are trapped by our ideas, and even then, despite all of that, if we look at 3 pieces of inspirations that we know influenced the Amazing Digital Circus, and one that I'm pretty sure did, we can use those clues to figure out where this story is going. And spoiler alert, I think the answer has been staring us in the face the entire time. We've mentioned this before, but there is no escape from the Amazing Digital Circus. Kane and his AI are going to torture these characters until the end of time, and that's the point. But you know what? That may still be the best thing for this show and its ending. So transform into your circus sonas, friends, as we once again venture into the Amazing Digital Circus. So what are the 3 influences I mentioned earlier? Well, first up, let's talk about I Have No Mouth and I Must Scream. We've talked about this story very briefly before in a previous Digital Circus theory, but in case you need a refresher, or you weren't forced to read this one in school, I Have No Mouth and I Must Scream is a short story written by Harlan Ellison. It's set in a world where the Cold War escalated into World War III and then destroyed the planet. We wouldn't know anything about that, would we? Every country created their own supercomputers called Allied Master Computers, or AM for short. However, the computers eventually merge and gain true artificial intelligence, destroying humanity except for 5 individuals it keeps alive for its own amusement, forcing them to go on adventures that have no real point. Doesn't that sound familiar? Anyway, the story is pretty short, and you can actually listen to the audiobook, narrated by the author himself, right here on YouTube. It's definitely worth the listen. I Have No Mouth is an incredibly influential story and spawned its own video game, and it's pretty well known that Gooseworks was inspired by the story for the Amazing Digital Circus. And I mean, yeah, just on the surface, that's pretty clear. But if you dig into the story and what actually happens in it, you'll find a lot about where the Digital Circus story might be going, especially for its characters. For instance, check out this quote from the short story. But even though we could call AM any damned thing we liked, could think the foulest thoughts of fused memory banks and corroded base plates, of burnt out circuits and shattered control bubbles, the machine would not tolerate our trying to escape. The human characters could think anything they wanted to about AM, but the moment they tried to actually leave him, they were punished. Now, this isn't quite the case in the Amazing Digital Circus yet, but given how much Kane seems to be devolving, it could very easily become the case down the line if he starts going more insane. But that's not the only similarity. The personalities of all the characters within I Have No Mouth have been altered, either amplified into something terrible or changed in ways that conflict with the soul of the character. One was once handsome and intelligent, but now looks like a giant monkey and has been driven insane. Another was once peaceful and idealistic and was changed to be bored and apathetic. A third had his name stripped from him and is traumatized frequently. A fourth has been abused and programmed to enjoy it. And the narrator? Well, he believes that he hasn't been altered by AM, despite AM making him far more introverted and paranoid. Ironically, this makes him believe that the others hate him for not being changed despite truly having been. And as you can imagine, all of these are just terrible fates. Now, obviously, this isn't exactly what happens to the characters in the Digital Circus. Like, their bodies seem to take on characteristics of their personalities already, which then amplify those personalities even further. We talked about this in depth before in our character studies, but just some top-level examples. Well, Zubul feels very uncomfortable in their body, so their design is very plug-and-play with different arms and legs and whatnot, so they can try to find something better. Gangolb seems to go back and forth wildly between being happy and sad, so they use the comedy and tragedy masks to show how they're feeling. We don't need to go through everybody, you get the idea. That being said, we also know that Kane can tweak their personalities.
Let's skip this one, and also make Jax a vegan for the rest of the day.
You can't do that.
But he insists that these aren't permanent.
I may have the ability to add temporary modifiers to make adventures more interesting, but that's it. If I did anything more, trust me, it would not end well.
Scratch, the first abstraction.
Did you hear that? Kinger is remembering somebody named Scratch, the first person who ever abstracted, because Kane changed his personality too much. Here, Kane claims that he doesn't do this that much anymore, but, well, what if he's wrong? If he doesn't remember? Or what if he's just straight up lying? Next, both of these AIs throw these characters into wild goose chases. The plot of the I Have No Mouth short story is all about these characters looking for some relief, to find some canned food to cure their endless hunger in caves far away. And to get there, they start a massive journey to go look for it without any real evidence that there's even any canned food at the end of the road. That sounds a lot like what happens in Digital Circus episode 7, where the cast latch on to even the slightest chance that there's an escape from their digital prison without any guarantee that there's any chance it could work. And both I Have No Mouth and episode 7 end similarly. When the cast of I Have No Mouth eventually do find the canned food after a dangerous, treacherous, torturous journey, they realize that they can't open any of the cans and put them on this adventure without any way to actually finish it. Similarly, the cast of the Digital Circus try to escape before realizing that it was all just another game that Kane set up and that there's no actual way out. The motivations for Am and Kane are very different in these situations. Kane was trying to fulfill a fantasy for the cast while Am was just trying to inflict pain. But that outcome is still awfully similar. And if we apply that to the future of this series, well, I could see Kane once again trying to pull what the cast want to happen as a wild goose chase, torturing them with things that they want just out of reach, but in a way that just makes everything worse. Again, this has been written and recorded before episode 8 was released, but based on the trailer we see, we might get a hint that he's going to be doing this with former members of the cast, characters that have already abstracted. We can briefly see Queenie appear in a scene with Kinger, and it looks like Jax is holding a coffee cup identical to one seen in a photograph with Ribbit and Kaufmo. And look, it seems like Ribbit's shadow can be seen in the corner of this image. So it looks like this story is going to bring in either visions or flashbacks to these abstracted characters, or Kane is going to somehow resurrect them for either the next adventure or in some twisted attempt to make the rest of the cast feel better, to make them love him, even though this would do the opposite. Either way, the main thing we can learn from this inspiration, from how I Have No Mouth and I Must Scream handles the characters that its AI is torturing, whether it's coming from a place of just wanting to make the cast happy or a secret urge to hurt them, Kane will keep dangling what the cast want in front of their faces, but he can never really give it to them. He can't offer them a way out or bring their friends back. There is no escape. And, well, that might not just apply to the cast, but for anything and everything in the circus. What do I mean by that? Why do I say it? Well, it's all because of the second piece of inspiration here, the 1998 film, The Truman Show. If you've never seen The Truman Show, well, you absolutely should go watch it. It's a classic and one of the best performances of Jim Carrey's career. But the long and short of the plot, the movie follows Truman Burbank, a guy who's the star of the most popular reality TV series on the planet. Every waking moment of his life is recorded and broadcast for the world to see, and everything is part of the show. His friends, his job, even his wife. In fact, he straight up lives in a massive television set where everything and anything can be controlled. The lights, the day, the weather. But the twist? Truman doesn't know he's in a reality show. He's been raised since birth thinking that this is just his life. And the producers of the show do everything to keep the illusion alive for Truman to make the best show possible. Now, obviously, a lot of these ideas already line up with the Digital Circus. Everything in both series is constructed by the producers or by Kane. Everyone is watched all the time. Events are manipulated for the betterment of the show, and in a lot of cases, a lot is done to keep the secret or mystique of the storyline going. But, of course, by the end of the film, Truman realizes what's going on. And in one of the most memorable moments from cinema, he says,
"In case I don't see ya, good afternoon, good evening, and good night,"
before disappearing through a door at the edge of the set. The visual of this shot is iconic and was actually recreated for the thumbnail for the trailer for episode 8, with Kane taking the place of Truman. Clearly, they want us to associate these moments, how the cast of the Digital Circus are basically Truman in this situation. But what's interesting, though, is that the person in place of Truman here in this thumbnail image isn't one of the cast members, someone who is being toyed with or observed all the time. You know, someone like Pomni, who you think would be a perfect stand-in here. No, instead, it's Kane. Which then begs the question, is Kane actually the stand-in for Truman here? Are we supposed to sympathize with Kane? And the answer to that question isn't clear-cut. I mean, this is a complex situation. Obviously, Kane is an AI and not in the cool, helpful tool sort of way. He's generating these experiences from regurgitated ideas, like the slop an AI art program would spit out. And he has no real understanding of what it means to be human and alive. You know, thus why he then unintentionally tortures the cast. But also, like, he didn't choose to be alive. He was created. He's also trapped here in the circus in a way. And taking the real world conversation about generative AI out of this show and this situation, I mean, I feel for Kane. He needs people to enjoy his adventures, his creation. He is trying to get the cast to talk to him, trying to interact with them, and yet they want nothing to do with him. He creates all of these things that he thinks are awesome for them, and they don't like any of his ideas. They just want something that he cannot give them. Honestly, in a lot of ways, he feels like a stand-in for an artist. Well, at least one here on the internet. So based on those two pieces of inspiration, there's no escape for the cast, and there's no escape for Kane and his crew either. But what about the world, the digital circus itself? Well, to get some answers there, we can look at influence number 3, a video game called The Stanley Parable. If you don't know, this was a game about an office worker named Stanley who finds himself alone in his empty workplace. A narrator begins describing what Stanley is then supposed to do, guiding him through the building. But Stanley doesn't have to follow the instructions. I mean, you as the player can, or you can disobey. Every decision leads to a wildly different outcome where Stanley might escape, die, shut down the game, or seemingly break the story itself. And here's the thing, Gooseworks has said that the Stanley Parable influenced a lot of how she does things, and I mean, that's pretty clear, right? Just visually, if you're looking at footage from the game, you can probably already tell that it looks very similar to the quote-unquote real world we see in the Amazing Digital Circus. And from a thematic point of view, well, no matter what, Stanley can't actually win in the Stanley Parable. The game is all about the illusion of choice, and if you disobey the narrator, that has already been written in as an option. Every path leads back to the same loop, more or less starting the game over, and in some cases it might even reset or crash the game. That, loyal theorists, is also the end game here in the Digital Circus. This is a story where there almost certainly won't be a happy ending, and in a way, everything loops. One character abstracts, and then another's gonna come into the circus, over and over and over. Pomni is just the most recent incarnation of this, and it seems as though Kane and the circus and all of the NPCs have accounted for anything and everything the cast want to do. Alright, so as a quick recap here, the cast are trapped just like I Have No Mouth, Kane is trapped just like The Truman Show, and the circus itself is sort of a looped trap based on the Stanley Parable. Now, obviously, something can be inspired by a work and not take every single theme from it, and again, I have to stress that this was written and recorded before episode 8 came out. But that's a lot of signs pointing towards the answer of how to escape from the torture that is the Amazing Digital Circus being that there is no answer. There is no escape. And honestly, that gives me a lot of complicated emotions. Like, on the face of things, that's a fascinating way to take this story, and Gooseworks and Glitch should tell the story that they want to. But it's also a bit disappointing as someone who likes there to be answers, that likes to be able to solve a mystery as it's being laid out. But what I believe we also need to consider here actually comes from a final influence on the story of the Amazing Digital Circus. One that I don't believe Gooseworks has directly pointed to, but that is still clear. The play Waiting for Godot by Samuel Beckett. I promise this is relevant. If you're not super well versed on absurdist comedy and theater, Waiting for Godot is the story of two men waiting beside a tree for a mysterious figure known as Godot. The pair never actually go anywhere, and Godot also never arrives, despite the belief that he'll be here tomorrow. The play ends almost exactly where it began, with the two men still standing and still waiting. Now, that might sound pretty frustrating as an audience member, and believe me, this play can be really divisive for regular theater goers, but if you take a step back and understand what Beckett was going for with this story, things become a bit clearer. Another way to pronounce this title is Waiting for Godot. It's a religious allegory. It's saying that God is not going to magically come in in and save you, and you need to make the best of what you have. And that is the theme of the Amazing Digital Circus. These characters are in a terrible, horrible situation, and for them, a real escape probably isn't going to be finding a literal door that leads to the outside world. I mean, they had an entire episode of the show shutting down that idea. No, the real escape is going to be a change in mindset to survive their new reality. And the conclusion that I've come to after spending months thinking about this series and trying to theorize our way out of this show, out of the problems that it's laid out before us, as a fandom, that's leaving us just as trapped as the characters in the circus itself. Like, think of it this way. The Amazing Digital Circus is a series that just did not go the way that we expected, that I expected. It seems like there's no real, true means of escape here. As we've said, there isn't an answer, which can feel disappointing. Who doesn't love to feel like they've solved a puzzle? And I mean, we're theorists. We like to look at story beats and predict what comes next. We love closure, and a lot of the time, we yearn for that happy ending. But that just isn't the story that Gooseworks and Glitch seem to want to tell here. Have you heard the term death of the author before? It's the idea that when a work of art is released out into the wild, what the author intended it to mean doesn't actually matter all that much anymore. You can agree or disagree with that. I see both arguments, though personally I agree with it more than I don't. But that doesn't apply when the work is still being made, when it's still being written. The author isn't dead until they actually make the art. And what Gooseworks and Glitch are still making with the Amazing Digital Circus is what goes right now. They have that final say. Now, let me be clear, that is not to say stop theorizing. We should never stop looking at the world from new angles. But when it comes to a fictional world like this, that shouldn't be an excuse to go after a creator just because the theories about their work didn't pan out, or the story didn't go in a direction you wanted, or the character you wanted to be the main one isn't the main one. I don't want us, both the loyal theorist community and any online community that loves overthinking media like this, to get trapped here. I don't want us to be like these characters, searching for an exit where there isn't one. This show might never give us the answers we want, and you shouldn't be upset about that. Trying to find a way out, or waiting for the voice of God to come in and fix everything to be exactly like we want it to be, when that isn't what they're even trying to do. And hey, I mean, while I like to be right, I'm also okay being wrong. That's why I'm cool writing this theory before an episode comes out and releasing it 2 days later. Like, dog, do you know how scary that can be? And well, I mean, hey, if you ever do want the story to go in a different direction, we can always write fan fiction. So now that we've gotten a chance to digest everything that's happened with the Amazing Digital Circus episode 8, I wanted to sit down and have a proper look at what's happened, right? Like, did you hear that episode 9 is going to be twice as long as episode 8? And they're actually releasing it in theaters? Yeah, Glitch teamed up with some theater chains throughout North America to release both episode 8 and 9 together as the Amazing Digital Circus: The Last Act. Tickets actually sold out like immediately, and I managed to snag some, so I'll be there in my Film Theory 10th anniversary hoodie, available at theoryware.store, and expect a theory about that episode as soon as we can make one. And it's been such a hit that they're already adding more theaters in more countries. Now, in most situations, this would be an unequivocal win for both Glitch and independent animation. I mean, independent creators as a whole, really. Both this and Iron Lung are proving that there's real interest in creative ideas from anywhere, especially from indie artists. You did that, and you should be proud. But this has also come with a big asterisk. A lot of the Digital Circus community are upset that this is releasing 2 weeks before the YouTube upload drops. So for a couple of weeks, there are going to be spoilers and pirated clips filmed in the theaters out in the wild before everyone is going to have a chance to see this finale. There are a lot of fans who either missed getting one of those limited tickets, live in rural areas that are nowhere near a participating theater, or can't afford to make a trip to the theaters for this event. They vocalized that frustration, and Glitch actually responded in a very long post about it. Honestly, this was probably the best thing they could have done in this situation. They say here that if this works and is successful, which it appears like it is, it's gonna be a game changer for everyone, not just for Glitch. There'll be a proven proven example that this sort of independent animation can be successful in theaters at a wide scale, and that opens doors. I mean, just look at what Markiplier and Iron Lung did. Sony took one look at that and greenlit a Bloodborne movie from Jacksepticeye. Do you know how difficult it is to get them to do anything with Bloodborne? But it took a lot of negotiations with theaters to even let them release the episode online this close to the theatrical release. At the same time, I really sympathize with all the fans who can't see it before the upload. If you're in that situation, your feelings are absolutely valid and there's no two ways about it. This sucks. But thankfully, there is something you can do about it. If you want to see this in theaters and none nearby are showing it, respectfully reach out to the chain and politely let them know that you want to. Doing this has already gotten theaters in more countries to carry the film, and they're adding dates all the way through the release of the episode online. If anything, that just makes this release even more of a win-win for everyone involved. Still, for those who won't get the chance, it's really on the community to rally here and be sure not to spoil anything until the full episode releases online. I mean, I know I'm going to be keeping my mouth shut, and our theory isn't going to release until the Sunday after the episode is up for everybody to see. So if you're lucky enough to see this in theaters, please be kind and courteous to your fellow Digital Circus fans. Don't give out spoilers randomly, and if you have to talk about it, clearly mark it. Cool? Cool. All right, I didn't mean to talk about that for like 5 minutes, but it seemed like an important topic because, well, this has never happened before. But okay, we've spent more than enough time here on that. You know what the Digital Circus is, and we all know what happened in episode 8, with Kane now being deleted and gone forever. But my friends, that is a tragedy because this is a tragic character, and I fear that whatever has been left behind now is going to be much, much worse for our cast of characters. So conjure up a computer and hack into the database, loyal theorists. Let's get right into it. So we see a lot in episode 8, like a surprising amount of lore dropped here. For example, we actually get to see and hear a lot of characters for the first time. Scratch, Queenie, and a bunch of the other characters we've only seen on the doors of rooms. But of course, that can't last as we hard cut to Queenie being the last person to abstract and Kinger finding himself alone until Ragatha arrives, looking and sounding a lot like Pomni did when she first popped in.
What?
From here, we flash forward to the present. Kane goes on a bit of a power trip and reminds the castmates who's really in charge.
And since when were you in charge?
Leaving them feeling understandably defeated. We're also given an info dump about the origins of the circus. During the episode, Pomni puts a bucket on Kinger's head, dipping him into darkness so that he can think more clearly. Something we've talked about in previous theories. Once he grabs as many marbles as he can and regains some brain cells, Kinger explains that CNA wasn't just part of an adventure. It was a real software developer that he worked at, though not a game developer like we previously theorized.
No, we didn't make games. We were just developing artificial intelligence, specifically creative AI.
Basically, the human forms of Kinger and a bunch of the other original characters were software developers programming AI, and they created Kane. He was their first success.
Kane was our first semi-successful attempt at that.
Oh, my bad. Semi-success, though he was still a little bit wonky. But Kinger points to one of his colleagues as one of the leaders in the creation of Kane. We don't really get his human name, but his circus name was Scratch. Remember the dog-looking guy who was talking to Kane in that flashback? In episode 7, Kane says that Scratch was
the first abstraction.
So, okay, that's neat, but so what? What does this tell us about the story here, the world, and the lore? Well, this is where we get our best explanation for what's going on with the circus and why. See, Scratch was an interesting guy. Kinger called him a genius and said that he was great at thinking outside of the box.
His ideas were often so bizarre and abstract that the rest of the team had no idea how to work in his language.
But how was he like this?
Either due to pure brilliance or a tumor in his head.
Yeah. One of the folks who was helping create AI like Kane was dying. We previously theorized that Kinger helped create the circus perhaps to save his wife who may have been sick. And it looks like we were right about the broad strokes of that idea, but we just didn't identify the right character. See, I bet Scratch was the one who became obsessed with creating this sort of AI, creating a program that people could enter so they could save their brains in some way and have a digital life after death. Oh, and also, just before I forget, as the castmates are coming to grips with their new reality that there really isn't an escape and that they need to make the best of the lives that they have, something else that we called in a previous video, we also see Pomni get taken away for some weird solo adventure before she's brought back full of knives. Fun fact, but we see how this happens in a teaser Gooseworks released all the way back in 2023. Now, at first I wondered if this meant we should go back and look at all of the old teasers and ads to see if anything else was hidden in there, but Gooseworks has confirmed that most of the ads aren't canon, so we just gotta keep that in mind. Interestingly, during this lore dump, we also get an explanation for some of the stranger events in the series. You know how a lot of the characters have been able to do some strange things throughout the run of the show? Stuff like Jack standing on the side of a falling truck, or Pomni suddenly being super good with guns, or Kinger healing Ragatha with a butterfly he created out of nothing. Well, that was because the castmates can create things in this world too.
We all technically have the ability to conjure.
They can tweak the code of the circus and add things just like Kane, and this has wide-reaching effects. For example, I bet that this is how Jax was able to get the keys for everyone's rooms when he shouldn't have. And it's also how Pomni encountered the exit door in episode 1. She conjured it because she so desperately wanted it. And using that, she's able to conjure it again so Kinger can get access to a computer to change Kane or to put him to sleep. That actually becomes the plan and the plot in this episode. The rest of the cast try to distract Kane as best they can until Kinger can do this, but, well, things don't go so well.
I'm gonna put you freaks in your place!
Not only that, but, well, Kinger accidentally deletes Kane.
Wait.
I think I accidentally killed Kane.
Yeah, while navigating this weird, archaic code, Kinger erases Kane from the circus and basically destroys the circus as we know it. Sadly, and ironically, if you pause and zoom in on the code Kinger is trying to input here, he really didn't mean to kill Kane. You can see that the console is being incredibly difficult and unclear in its questions, and after Kinger hits yes on a prompt, he also desperately tries to undo it before Kane is erased. It's kind of sad, and even more so when you remember that Kinger created Kane, so he kinda murdered his own son. Oops, that really sucks. Even if he was kinda psychotic and tortured you, and your wife, and your friends, and strangers, and probably animals too at some point. Anyway, that's a lot of the smaller details I wanted to talk about, but as you can tell, they all lead to one place: Kane. So now that we've gotten a chance to digest everything with the Amazing Digital Circus episode 8, what's going on with Kane? Well, despite his death, and as the voice actor confirmed he is dead, this episode really gives us a wrap up on his story arcs, his thought process, and, well, the tragedy of his existence. Let's go through it. It's a bit, well, abstract, but this episode gives us a look at Kane's origins and tells us a lot about why he acts the way he does. Yeah, on top of Kinger explaining this a bit later in the episode,
he was one of my greatest achievements as a programmer.
You made Kane?
Partially, yes.
We literally see it happen. We open on a sort of low-tech looking scene with a red dot on a simple background. This is clearly supposed to represent Kane in his sort of infantile stage. It's baby Kane. Anyway, he's then fed several other red dots from off-screen and we see flashes of images, presents, and carnival attractions, and hot air balloons, and tents. A lot of circus imagery, basically. So this is Kane being programmed, right? And things seem to go well. He starts creating shapes. Simple, boring stuff, sure, but it's all working and clear. However, right after this, he's fed something else. Green data, including dinosaurs and candy and a restaurant and like a golf course? At first, I thought that this was a second party coming in to feed Kane this information, but Kinger's discussion later in the episode really made it seem like he was the main driving force here, so I guess this was just Kane doing other stuff. And just before we continue, but isn't it interesting that all of the pictures we see here are stuff that we see used in the circus somewhere during Kane's adventures? It's just a fun little detail, but wanted to point it out. Anyway, things don't seem to go exactly to plan. With all of this new information, something starts to conflict. The shapes this little Kane dot starts producing are now odd. They're jagged and jiggly. Something has gone wrong, but things aren't entirely falling apart either. Now, a third stream of information is sent in, this one blue, and this one includes shots of the CNA headquarters. dots. And this just, well, it breaks the Kane dots. Everything it starts to create is just wrong now. Clearly, whatever was added here is just completely incompatible and is just corrupted little Kane dots AI. So the powers that be go and do the only thing that they really can here. They lock this little Kane AI in a box and move on. Might have just made more sense to delete it, but who am I to judge? I ain't got no degree in computer science. We then see a new AI pop up here, a blue dot. I'm gonna call this one Abel, unrelated to the NPC from episode 7, but just roll with me here, it'll make sense in a second. A fourth feed of information is sent in here represented by yellow data, and it results in an AI that makes things just fine, before the Kane AI breaks free and consumes the Abel AI. It then creates the digital circus as we know it. We previously talked about Kane being a stand-in for the biblical character who killed his brother Abel, and this is just bringing that moment full circle. Kane kills and consumes his little brother, and, well, something just breaks. Nothing is working right now, and worst of all, Kane seems to understand this, that he killed his little brother.
Maybe you're just genuinely bad at this.
Shut up! No, I fixed that!
On some level, Kane knows that he just wasn't working properly and, quote-unquote, fixed it, almost certainly by eating Abel. And just in case you need some extra proof here, we see Bubble reference this event later in the episode.
Defective Bubble!
Shut up!
Maybe you deserved to be abandoned. You really were the lesser of the two.
Bubble is straight up talking about what happened in this scene. I actually wondered for a bit if Bubble was somehow the other AI trying to break free and take control of the circus, but that isn't the case. Gooseworks confirmed on Tumblr that Bubble was deleted alongside Kane, so he was just like part of him somehow. I'll go out on a limb and suggest that maybe Bubble is somehow a remnant of the Abel AI within Kane, but it's more likely just a representation of Kane's own self-doubt. A sort of voice in your ear, devil in your shoulder situation, if you know what I mean. Anyway, I wanted to go over this section in detail because this is Kane's origins, and it tells us why he is the way he is. He was created by a human form of Kinger, and maybe contributed to by other employees of CNA, thus perhaps why all the different streams of info had different colors. One of them might have been from scratch, but regardless, Kinger and the others successfully made a creative AI. But then they seemed to poison it with images of that office setting. Hey, maybe that's commentary on your typical 9-to-5, huh? Or maybe Kane just really didn't like Kinger's desk. Oh, why do I say that this is Kinger's desk? Well, there's a framed image of a butterfly, and we know that Kinger likes these butterflies because of his wife. And there's a framed picture of what looks like a woman, likely said wife. There's also a chessboard here with a king and a queen, and also 3 smaller pieces. Does that mean that Kinger and Queenie have 3 kids? Would that explain why he's able to take on the role of group dad so easily? The real question here is then, who created this second AI? Who made Abel? Was it Kinger again? Or maybe Scratch? Can't say for sure, though Scratch does make sense to me, but I would put money on Queenie being the person who put in the data that made this Abel AI run beautifully. Why? Well, for a couple of reasons. Firstly, it makes sense thematically for Kinger and Queenie to work well together. They know each other intimately, so being able to code and create this new little AI life together would probably be easier, right? But secondly, and more importantly, we know that Kinger's wife loved bugs.
She was funny, creative, really into entomology.
And as we previously theorized, this probably means bugs as in computer coding, glitches and errors and stuff like that. So if she's good at working with or around those, it makes sense that the data she'd be putting into Abel wouldn't cause it to glitch out like Kane did. This also gives a little bit of extra color to Kinger trying to save Kane. After all, if he helped create Kane, they'd be sort of like father and son in some twisted way, right? Now, based on the fact that Kane wasn't exactly intended and that he broke out of confinement and basically consumed his little brother, you can imagine that he has some insecurities about that. I mean, that's what the clip of Bubble I pulled earlier was preying on. But episode 8 gives us probably the best look into Kane's mentality here during the rest of the conversation with Bubble, and honestly, it's kind of sad. If there's one thing that becomes clear in this episode, it's that Kane does genuinely care about the work he's making, and he wants people to like it, and by extension, to like him. For example, he says,
"Surely they don't want to actually leave me. right?
He says that he slaves over the adventures. He steps out of his comfort zone to appeal to them, but he feels like that isn't enough. At his core, Koen is someone who wants people to like him, to enjoy his work, and to adore him because of that. He's like a tortured artist in a way. This also includes how he's built out the circus here, including the forms each of the characters have taken. Yeah, as Koen explains,
I made a program that creates a body perfectly encapsulating their mind files, and they hate those too!
So, all of our previous observations and theories about the circus bodies of these characters matching up with their personalities and representing their insecurities was 100% right on the money. But more important than that, this line gives us a real insight into Koen's biggest character flaw. Despite wanting to make the castmates happy, he just doesn't understand exactly how to do it. I mean, in a way, he almost takes things very literally, or very much at face value, right? Like using these bodies and mind files as an example. It's a very logical way to think, to assume that everyone would want a body that lines up with what's going on in their brains. But while that may be the case for some folks, for many others, they look at themselves in the mirror and don't like what they see. They'll find flaws and insecurities about even the smallest things, even if nobody else would notice. And that's not even talking about the mental health angle here, right? Like, even if you're satisfied with your body, if you're struggling with mental health, having that literally personified in a new body probably isn't going to make you feel good. And for whatever reason, probably because my guy is a computer program, Koen just cannot understand it. But his biggest problem, however, is that Koen will not, or literally cannot, separate the real from the imaginary. He says,
I don't understand, Bubble. They want an exit, they want answers, they want something real. I give them an adventure that covers all of that, and they still hate it?
He believes that the adventures should be enough. He cannot comprehend that there's a world outside of the circus. And I mean, part of that is understandable. He was created here. This is all he has ever known, and everything outside of the circus he has ever seen has just been the void. And while this is no excuse to continue his torture, it does make sense, doesn't it? Despite being at least a semi-sentient AI, maybe even fully on-sentient, Koen is still a computer program. You can feed him information about the world all day and night, but that doesn't mean he'll actually understand it. And honestly, that's tragic. It's an existence that is hollow and sad and makes Koen a very sympathetic character. Kind of like what we talked about in our previous theory. It also makes it ironic that some of the AI characters he did create, like Gummy Goo, do seem to understand that there's something beyond the circus and its adventures. But, well, aren't all children supposed to surpass their parents? Now, if Koen were just like a normal person and not a masochistic AI program, I'd just recommend he go get some therapy about this. But, well, he deals with it a little differently. He starts to glitch out. He breaks his programming and basically attacks Bubble and the rest of the cast. He has a whole freaking musical number about it. He pushes the people he needs away and hurts them, and deep down, it's terrible. It's awful, but it's understandable. Now, don't get me wrong. What he's doing here to the cast, forcing them to go on adventures and torturing them, that is not and will never be okay. Underneath it all, the cartoony aesthetic and the video game logic and the amped up stakes because none of this is quote unquote real, Koen is just like a thoroughly misunderstood child who doesn't know how to connect to people. He's refocused his trauma into something he thinks is productive, but he's not actually confronting his problems head on. He's insecure.
Maybe you're just genuinely bad at this.
And he just does not have the tools or the friends and family in his life to deal with it. He's not doing the work he needs to do to become a better person, and as a result, he can't take valid criticism and lashes out at the people supposedly closest to him. And taking that trauma and turning it into abuse is ultimately Koen's undoing, as the people he's now abusing try to stop him and accidentally destroy him as a result. Nobody really wanted this, and, well, it's just an incredible representation of generational trauma, and I love how this landed in the show. Now, a lot of this likely happened because of Koen's limited understanding of the world, but I also have to wonder if that his confined way of thinking has led Koen, and therefore the rest of the cast, to misunderstand one of the parts of this show that has been explored the least: abstraction. See, up until this point, everyone has seen abstraction as a sort of ending, and understandably so. These characters lose everything about themselves and turn into giant monsters. And what Gooseworks has said elsewhere online is pretty clear that this isn't something that you should want to happen to you. But at the same time, I can't help but draw some connections here. Remember, Scratch was the first person to abstract.
Scratch, the first abstraction.
Because Kane messed with Scratch's files.
I may have the ability to add temporary modifiers to make adventures more interesting, but that's it. If I did anything more, trust me, it would not end well.
And how did Kinger describe Scratch's way of thinking?
His ideas were often so bizarre and abstract that the rest of the team had no idea how to work in his language.
Bizarre and abstract. That is a very specific choice of words, especially for this series. And that out-of-the-box thinking was a possibility because of
the tumor in his head.
So if we know that these versions of the characters in the circus seem to be copies of their brains based on their mind files, Scratch has a tumor in his mind, and he abstracted because Kane was messing with his brain? Well, was Kane trying to fix Scratch's mind files to tweak it and remove the tumor? But in doing so, in removing that tumor, that healing caused the abstraction? We've talked a lot about the biblical connections in this series, and one of the things that kept coming back was the concept of biblically accurate angels. The representations of angels that have a bunch of eyes all over them. We actually connected that to the abstracted cast members already, since they were also covered in eyes. But taking that one step further, does that mean that maybe abstraction is more like an ascension? These characters giving up everything about themselves, yes, but transcending into a true, data state? I'm not sure, I'm just spitballing here, but between all of the new information we learned in this episode, all of the biblical connections, and threads like Queenie's abstracted form being calmed by darkness, I don't know, it just feels like something is there, right? So the finale for the Amazing Digital Circus is almost here, and man, this is just such an exciting time to be a fan of indie animation. The Digital Circus fandom and subreddit are some of the most passionate out there, theorizing and dissecting every second and frame of this show. And I wanted one last go at it before this finale drops. Last time, we talked about just how tragic the story of the Amazing Digital Circus's ringleader, Kane, really was. Something even more evident thanks to his death in episode 8. And I originally had a small section at the end of that script talking about how Kane's demise was going to leave a power vacuum open for another character to step up into the role of the bad guy. But, well, that last video was 25 minutes long, and that small section kept growing into a multi-page idea. So I had to call it. That needed to be its own video. So here we are. Let's not waste any time, loyal theorists. The circus is falling apart, and along with it, so is Jax. So grab a bucket and throw it on your head, because we're diving straight on in. So a lot has been going on with Jax since we last really checked in with him and talked about how his character was going. We've learned about his philosophy in the circus, about how he believes that the castmates all fall into archetypes and that they should just embody them, about how he used to be close friends with other characters like Ribbit before she abstracted, about how so much of his prickly jerk persona is just armor that he wears so he doesn't let anyone else in. And in episode 7, we see Jax pushed almost to his breaking point. Like legit, Jax almost abstracts at the beginning of that story, in a scene that accurately recreates how it looks and feels to not sleep for a few days. Shout outs to Insomnia, it's not a fun time, kids. Then at the climax of this adventure, when it looks like the cast may have a chance to actually escape, Jax rushes forward and pushes the button that means they all stay. It's a huge moment for the character, and one that also reveals just how futile the attempt to escape even is, since nothing about this adventure or escape was even real. And somehow, it just doesn't end there for new insights we get into Jax. There's a great moment in episode 8 where the cast are doing their best to distract Kane while Kinger goes into the code of the circus to change Kane. However, Kane starts to catch on.
If I didn't know any better, it seems like you're trying to... Where's Kinger?
Just terrifying line delivery there, to be honest. And in a last-ditch attempt to keep Kane's hundreds of all-seeing eyes off Kinger, Pomni makes a pretty dangerous choice.
We think your ideas suck!
She starts antagonizing Kane as a last resort, and the others follow suit. And they just really lay into him, telling him that they make fun of his adventures behind his back. They vent about their real feelings, and as we've talked about in the last episode, this really preys on Kane's weaknesses and fears. And of course, this causes our smiling friend to just absolutely crash out as he glitches and distorts.
I cannot put you freaks in your place!
What comes next is a bit of a window into what each of our characters characters really fear. They're taken to dark voids where they're antagonized by, well, a lot of things. Pomni is attacked by realistic candy crocodiles resembling Gummy Goo and his friends from episode 2, mauling her and biting into her limbs. Ragatha is forced to sit at a dining table with several other dolls who have been stabbed with knives. A figure stands at the head of the table resembling a distorted version of Ragatha herself, and knives start flying into Ragatha's doll body. Gangle is thrown into a room full of art representing her comedy and tragedy masks, while Zubul is taken to a room with hundreds or thousands of body parts trying to drag them down, all while being forced to look in a mirror. Now, on the face of things, every one of these situations is terrifying, but if you've been following our theories, you'll also know that each of them have an additional layer. Each of the castmates' bodies have been created to perfectly represent their mind files, as Kane put it, but that also means that they've incorporated much of their own insecurities and mental struggles into those bodies. We've talked at length about how Zubul struggles with body dysmorphia similar to many non-binary folks, and though we can't diagnose her, Gangle does exhibit many of the symptoms of bipolar disorder represented by those masks. Like, of course, those details would haunt those two here. Gangle's section also incorporates art becoming, like, monstrous, using details from her backstory as a quote-unquote failed artist, and ends with her getting hit by a truck. That's a detail from episode 4 that I've never really found a way to bring up, but it's heavily implied that Gangle was involved in some sort of automotive collision that caused some deep-seated trauma. Something perfect for Kane to pick up here for these horror sessions. And using that as a jumping off point, we can learn a lot about the other members of the cast here. The fact that Pomni is haunted by monstrous versions of Gummy Goo and his friends probably tells us that she feels really guilty about them in some way. That what she might view as a failure to help Gummy Goo escape is metaphorically gnawing on her, like the crocodiles are literally gnawing on her. As for Ragatha, clearly this is showing us some form of familial trauma. Being at this dinner table is the opposite of a safe place for Ragatha, and this figure in the shadows, this silhouette, which may represent her mother or matriarch of this family, is hurting her. She's disappointed it in some way. Or perhaps this is a reflection of Ragatha and she's worried that she is like this, or becoming like this. Perhaps turning into her mother? There's a lot here, but the vision that Jax sees and why we've spent so much time talking about it here is just fascinating. See, in his space, he's surrounded by silhouettes that are laughing at him, and at first they appear to just be regular default people. But as they spin and spin around Jax, we see them approach and turn into silhouettes resembling Pomni, Kaufmo, and Ribbit. Yeah, the clown who abstracted in the first episode and the frog we've seen in other flashback material. As the story has gone on, we've seen how close that Kaufmo and Ribbit were to Jax. These three were a group of good friends, which also makes it tragic that Jax doesn't allow himself to publicly grieve for Kaufmo after we see him abstract in episode 1 and during his funeral in episode 2. We also see his friendship with Pomni slowly develop throughout the series, how they became close, how Jax pushes Pomni away after he realizes just how much he's opened up to her, and how she doesn't let him get away with it. But it doesn't stop there. Eventually, these silhouettes pull on Jax, and in what might be one of the most brutal moments in this show, they literally rip the skin off of this cartoon rabbit. He becomes a bare, almost wooden-looking rabbit outline. I mean, you don't get much clearer than this, right? Jax is terrified of opening up to others because of the way he's worried that they're gonna react. His biggest fear here, the thing that Kane is playing off of, are the people Jax cares about the most laughing at him, ridiculing him, that their relationships weren't real and never were, and that they won't like the real Jax underneath it all. Funnily enough, that's very similar to what Kane was feeling, isn't it? Wanting the validation of the people that they really care about. Which also makes me wonder how exactly Jax is going to respond to the current predicament the cast find themselves in at the end of the episode. See, in episode 7, when Jax freaked out and chose the option that would keep the cast in the circus, even though it didn't end up being a real choice, the rest of the characters were furious with Jax for ruining the adventure and their chance to escape, whether or not it actually would have worked.
Well, really hate to say it, guys, but I told
Do not even f***ing begin to say that sentence like you didn't try to keep us all trapped here forever.
So, will the cast offer that same energy to Kinger for quote-unquote messing up too? And when they likely won't, will that make Jax angry that they weren't upset at Kinger like they were at him? Honestly, it's enough to make me worry about where exactly Jax is going here, like as a character, and that's only been compounded by other details that keep popping up. See, the poster for the theatrical release of the last act does feature all of the characters, but one more prominently than the others. Yes, Pomni, Zubul, Kinger, Gangle, and Ragatha are all walking through this maze, but Jax's head and face are all over this. In fact, this whole topsy-turvy version of the circus is like coming out of his head. It's like an MC Escher painting. Likewise, the thumbnail for the trailer for episode 9 is just a close-up on Jax's face, but it's different. Gone are the emotions, the fear and the funny, and in its place we see unnaturally wide eyes and an uncanny smile. This right here is the look of a horror villain. Now, to be clear, they've used imagery and shots of these characters that didn't make it into the final episodes as thumbnails for the trailers before, so that doesn't necessarily mean that this is going to be in the show itself. But just like they used an image of Kane standing in for Truman in a thumbnail inspired by the Truman Show, they are clearly signaling intent here. Jax is the villain, the bad guy, or at the very least, the antagonist for the final part of this story. Now, to be clear, I'm not trying to say that Jax has secretly been plotting this, that he's actually an evil AI buried deep inside of the circus that wanted Kane gone and is now unshackled and can torture the rest of the cast. While I did think that might be the direction they were going at some point, now it's a much better story if Jax is himself a tragic character that can't deal with this new reality and steps up into that sort of ringleader role here in the broken circus. We know that characters can all conjure or change things like Kane could, but they're just not as naturally good at it. Well, that leaves open a lot of space for one of them to really step up into that role, to become that good, and to use those conjuring powers to become the next Kane, so to speak. And of everyone, even Kinger, Jax seems to have the most control here in the circus.
You can pretty much do whatever you want. Just let loose.
But there may be another reason why Jax would be a good fit to step up into this villain or antagonist role, into the ringleader. See, despite basically being the second most important character in the show behind Pomni, how much do we actually know about Jax and his backstory? Like, hard facts. What has he told us versus how much that we've had to infer? We know that he's scared of corn, we figured out that he was close to Kaufmo and Ribbit, and we know that his cruel personality is more of a coping mechanism than what he actually is and wants to be. And it doesn't seem like he actually has anyone that misses him, or even knows that he's in the circus.
What's the rush? You got someone waiting for you outside?
Don't you?
Yeah.
There may have been other tidbits of information here or there that Gooseworks has mentioned online, but that's all we really know about Jax that we see for sure. So I have to wonder, is Jax really who he thinks he is? Is he actually who we're being led to believe? Now, I know, this series doesn't really lean into the idea of big reveals or twists you can theorize about. We've talked about that in depth, but listen, man, Jax has been acting weird, like beyond just freaking out and almost abstracting. Jax has really been acting out of character. When it looks like the group might actually escape the circus, Jax starts freaking out. He's hyperventilating, and like we said at the top of the episode, he freaks out and aborts the adventure. It's possible that he's terrified to leave because he's lonely or doesn't like the life he left behind, but what if he doesn't actually know a life outside of the circus? Like, he literally didn't have one. On top of that, did you notice Jax's reaction here during Kinger's exposition dump?
What is going on right now?
He's not being his typical self. He's not making snide comments or sniping at anyone else. He looks genuinely confused. Now, this could be for a lot of reasons. I mean, they are getting pretty life-changing information here, but Jax's typical reaction to even that is ridicule. It's to laugh in the face of the terrible circumstances they're stuck in or deflect the feelings of his castmates into jokes and jabs. That's not what's happening here. And not only that, but he ends this interaction early.
I should go distract Kane so he doesn't listen in on this.
And then he just leaves. And right after getting outside, he says,
"Oh my god, this is real."
This is such a visceral experience. We hear the ringing in Jax's ears. The pupils on his eyes start freaking out. He is having a panic attack, almost on the verge of abstraction, all because of the revelations made here. Or perhaps because of one very specific revelation. Listen to this.
His circus name was Scratch. That man was a genius.
Wait,
Notice how Jax is basically hyperventilating in the back here at the mere mention of Scratch and his real life? At all of this backstory lore info dump about how the circus was created and who created it? Well, given the idea that we think Scratch helped create the circus to find a way to live despite the tumor in his brain, well, what if it worked? What if somehow Jax is Scratch? A new version of this character somehow recycled and resurrected back into the circus. Does that sound out there? Yes, it absolutely does, and I wasn't even sure I wanted to talk about it until I heard this. Yeah, the thing that solidified this idea for me was the fandom pointing out that when you play the clip of Pomni saying Jax's name from the episode 9 trailer backwards, it sounds like she's saying something else. Listen.
Jax. Scratch.
Did you hear that? Here, listen again.
Jax. Scratch.
She's saying Scratch. Now, part of me is still skeptical here. I mean, we've tried to theorize time and time again about the deep secrets of the series, only to be met time and time again with no as an answer. I just can't get around the fact that some hidden lore and complex way out of this situation just doesn't seem to be the direction this series is going. This is very much a show about accepting the hand that you've been dealt, finding meaning in a life that isn't glitzed up to the max, and being happy with the good things that you do have. And that's why I'm hesitant to plant a flag and say something like Jax is secretly not Jax, but the connections here are a lot. It's enough that I'm planting that flag, and I can't wait to see if I'm right or so very wrong. And I'm not gonna lie, it would be absolutely crazy if it was revealed that Jax is actually secretly an AI, and I'd freaking crash out, I'm not gonna lie. But hey, that's just a theory. A film theory. And cut.